Notre Dame fans, Irish Breakdown family, we are back. It is Thursday. My man Vince is with me. And Vince, before we get started on the show today, I got some exciting news I want to share with people. So obviously we launched our message board in July. And Vince and I talked, and my goal was to have 1,000 people sign up by the start of the season. And then my goal was to add 1,000 people each year. So my goal was to be at 2,000 subscribers by the time we got to the beginning of the 2023 season. Today, on April 14th, 7 months after launching, we just had our 2,000 subscriber.
Hey,
now 2,000 is not our gross, it's our net. So we've had some people leave, but that's where we're at. We finally passed 2,000 subscribers for the first time. So message board is really, really growing. Working on getting the proper tone of the message board where I like it. There's been a lot of angst and a lot of negativity lately, which it's okay to, not have, we don't have to have that everything is awesome mentality all the time, but, we don't have to complain about everything. Brian Kelly's not the head coach anymore, so we don't have to do that anymore. But, but that's part of a growing community, right? Is it takes time to kind of mold it the way that we want it to be, because we want it to be different. But it's super, super exciting. And it was, I bet on y'all, right? Like I hired Ryan and Sean with the thought that I think the folks are going to come through and we're going to continue to grow. It was based off the projection. And so far it has certainly paid off, and you all have come through for us. And I can't thank you enough. And we're just getting started. So here's what I'm going to ask all of you to do, because we have some really fun things. There's going to be, if you're a member, there's going to be some cool perks that are going to come out this summer. I'm just going to throw that little teaser out there. We're just now working on the format and the layout for it. That's all I'm going to say that you'll get if you're a member. And, it's going to be cool. So what I'm going to ask all you to do is continue to be part of what we're doing here on the chat, here on the message board, on the website, and obviously on the YouTube channel. Continue to be a subscriber, but start sharing what we're doing with other people, with other Notre Dame fans that they're not signed up on Irish Breakdown. Tell them about us, right? And if you hear some of that nonsense and those lies that get spread about us by others, let them know. Now, that ain't true. I can assure you that. We got the intel, right? So just let people know, like, hey, look, give us a shot. And I've had people say, I signed up, wasn't really a big fan of yours, but I signed up and the board's great. Or I gave the show a shot and I love it. So definitely want to give that a shot. So I want to thank you all again so much, right? And this has been such a fun ride. I was talking to my wife the other day, Vince. I'm like, it's like 2 years ago at this time, Vince, you and I were talking about, like, I don't know if we're going to be able to make it. Because we had just, like, COVID had just hit. They had just, like, we were just a couple weeks away from, like, everything getting shut down. And it was just like, man, there's no, I'm a sports site and there's no sports to cover. You know what I mean? But
it was terrible.
We had some real loyal people. Yeah. We had some real loyal people sign up, and they've stayed with us, and we've grown and grown and grown and grown. And it's just been an absolute blast. And my hope is that we're just getting started. I told Ryan, I said, I don't want you to be my only full-time employee for very long.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at. So loving what we've got going on, and it's all because of you guys. But we didn't come here for that today, right? We didn't come here for like a group hug and the kumbayas and all that, although I'm excited about it. Somebody's walking by Vince's class. I'm like, what the heck is that guy doing?
He likes his laptop a lot.
Why is he hugging his computer? You're not allowed to watch that kind of stuff in school, sir. But we are going to dive into our topic for today. And our topic for today, Vince, is the Notre Dame defense. And we're going to start talking about Marcus Freeman because, Vince, you've been at practices. Ryan has been at practices. Sean's been at practices. And I've talked to a ton of sources about practices. And one of the things that I have kind of been told is I've been told about a lot of changes that are happening on the Notre Dame defense.
Okay.
And just the role that Al Golden is having. Like, he is really the voice of the Notre Dame defense. And I got to tell you, that says a lot to me about Marcus Freeman as a head coach.
Yeah.
Yep. Because for me, what that tells me, Vince, is that what was the one big complaint about Brian Kelly? Like, if you're going to hire somebody to run the offense, let them freaking run the offense.
Exactly. And that was
right?
clearly not the case.
Right.
Clearly.
And it was always like kind of doing it his way. So what I'm hearing is there are certain philosophies that Marcus Freeman believes in that Al Golden has to believe in. And
Sure.
the reason Al Golden was brought in is because he believes in those things. And that comes down to really an aggressive defense that's more about the players and letting them play fast and make plays than it is about us schematically trying to show everyone how smart we are. Right? That's the basic philosophy behind it. Now, after that, I hired you to run the defense. And from what I'm told, it really sounds like he's allowing Al Golden and the new staff to do that. That says a lot about a 36-year-old guy who was at the peak of that side of the ball. I mean, he was considered one of the best defensive minds in the game. For him to give up that control like that quickly says a lot about his view of what a head coach is supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And I think it speaks volumes about Marcus. Because, again, trust me, Marcus Freeman is involved. And if he sees something he's not going to like, and doesn't like, he's going to be involved.
And that's what a head coach does.
Turn it over like that and to show that faith in Al Golden right away to say, look, I'm hiring you to do a job. Now go do it. I mean, it says a lot, Vince.
Well, and as a head coach, he's going to do the same thing on offense, too. If he sees something that he doesn't like, he's going to say something. I mean, because that's what a head coach does. Now, he hired, obviously, Tommy Rees to run the offense, and he's hired Al Golden to run the defense. And just to kind of expound on what you just said, being able to take a step back from the defense as the defense, I mean, he was the defensive coordinator. Those were his guys. Being able to take a step back from that and say, and allow Al Golden to be the defensive coordinator, right? That, I don't think people really understand how big that is.
That's not easy to do. Vince.
That is not easy to do. And to literally put it into words in that I can't stand over by the defense anymore at practice. I have to move around a little bit more. You know what I mean? To like have that in your head and to understand where I'm standing is actually going to make a big difference from a perception standpoint from the players. Because he can say everything that he wants. Hey, Coach Golden's in charge of the defense, blah, blah, blah. Right. But if he's standing there at the linebacker, drills, and he's standing on the defensive side of the ball all the time, is it really Al Golden's defense? You know what I mean?
And that's the key, because that doesn't matter for us. It doesn't matter for
not at all
the egos between Marcus Freeman and Al Golden. It to a degree it does, but I mean, at the end of the day, if Marcus Freeman was still dictating everything, it would be successful to a degree because Marcus Freeman is a great defensive mind. Our thing was we felt like, look, I wouldn't actually mind seeing Marcus Freeman stay as the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, we talked about that. We talked about that.
And so he's a great defensive mind. But here's the thing: if he is still doing that, then the players kind of have what we complained about with the offense is like, who's really in charge here?
Right.
Is it Brian Kelly? Is it Mike Denbrock? Is it Chip Long? Is it Tommy Rees? Is it Harry Heastan? Like, who's in charge here? Right. And so to allow to allow Al Golden immediately to come in and say, hey, guys, that's the leader of the defense. I'm the head football coach. And again, Marcus Freeman's going to be involved with the defense. He's going to be involved in different things because you're not going to be able to just completely turn it off, nor should he.
No, he should not.
He's a great defensive mind. Why take that asset away from the defense?
I don't want him hanging out in the office while they're having practice.
Right. It's so important, however, for him to allow Al Golden and Al Washington and Chris O'Leary and Mike Mickens and James Laurinaitis, who's the defensive GA, who's apparently has a big role in it too, to allow them to establish with the players that, hey, we are in charge of this thing. Right. And we are the ones that, so you need to look at us, because what can happen is, you listen to them, but then your eyes kind of drift over to the head, the former defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
It's important that he allows that to be firm. And so
that takes time to get that to where you want it to be, right? And he's doing all the right things, because at first, when he first took over, that's what was going on, but that's just the way it is. They were looking to him all season, and now all of a sudden he's the head football coach, right? But they're always going to be, oh, is Coach Freeman cool with this?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that doesn't happen overnight,
right?
But he's doing the necessary steps from all accounts,
right,
to make sure that transition is not only a smooth one, but a clear-cut one.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important. And I think a lot of people don't really understand how important that is.
How important it is and how hard it is.
Yes.
Look, I'm just telling you right now, if I became a head coach when I was 36 years old, there's no way in hell I'd have given up the offense.
Right.
None.
Right.
None. I mean, it just because, again, Vince, you know how I am with this job, right? Like, I'm a control freak. This is how I want it done. Like, everything needs to be done the way that I want it done, right?
Sure.
And you know, because when you're in charge, like at the end of the day, if we put out a bad article, if we do, no, I'm the one that's ultimately responsible for it, right? If we have a bad show, it's like, you know, Driscoll carried it and Vince sucked. No, it's, hey, Driscoll, what's going on with the show, right? Like, I'm the one getting the emails, as I should, because this is my company.
Right.
Same thing when you're the head coach. So it says a lot about Marcus Freeman to be able to say, hey, look, this is my job. I hired you to do that job. Now go do it, and I'm going to give you the authority to do it the way, you know, within the philosophy of what I believe in, right? To go do it. I mean, it was important. It was an important step, and I think it's going to allow Al Golden to then be more willing to say, hey, look, I don't have to, like you said, Vince, you made a good point. Like looking over you said it about the players, I believe, is you made it about the players, but you also can kind of get that way as a defensive coordinator. Like, gee, I wonder if Coach Freeman's going to be okay with this.
Sure.
And, you know, now it's just like, look, man, this is your defense. Go do it. And so we got to talk about what that looks like.
Sure.
I think that's the next piece to this, Vince, is what does it look like?
And I just want to add one more piece to that. Yeah. I think another really important aspect of this is that Al Golden has been a head coach.
Right.
And so he understands where Marcus Freeman is coming from, but he's also been a coordinator, right? So he understands both sides of it. And I think that can be important. I think that if he was just a coordinator in his whole career, could it still work? Absolutely. But at least he's coming from a place where he has been the guy in charge, where he's needed to lean on coordinators, et cetera. So he understands what Marcus Freeman is looking for.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's also, so when Marcus Freeman does come to him with something like, hey, I need this to be different, or I need this to be better, he understands, like, hey, that's what the head coach has to do, right?
Exactly.
But when you allow that established relationship and an established hierarchy of leadership on defense to be established, and you've allowed him to kind of step in and say, hey, this is his defense,
right?
You know, then there's going to be an immediate gain of trust from Al Golden to Marcus Freeman. Because look, the dynamic of a 51-year-old former head coach who's now the coordinator, and a 36-year-old head coach who was playing in college when Al Golden was recruiting 5 stars and building a defense at Virginia. You know, that's not an easy thing. And kudos to Coach Freeman for number one, kudos to Al Golden for being willing to take this kind of job.
Sure.
This is not the only offer he had.
Right.
And it says a lot about his view of Notre Dame and his respect for Marcus Freeman. But then for Coach Freeman to build it in a way immediately to say, hey, look, it's like, you got to take a step back first, then you can kind of get more involved.
Right.
And I think it's worked out really well so far. So now can we move on to kind of what it looks like?
Absolutely.
I didn't mean it like that. It's like, I mean, that's a really good point you made.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that nothing else
We're good.
Really get popped in your head.
Right.
So it's always happening. I know. Just got to make sure I give you the opportunities to get it out. Right. So Vince, let's kind of talk, and we got to be careful about going too in depth on the changes,
right?
Just because we don't want to be, we don't want to give away too much. And
it's not our job to give the scouting report to anybody else,
right? Hey, Ohio State, guess what they're doing? But I think there's certainly some noticeable things, and the one thing we will point out, because this has kind of been obvious from film that's been made available, is Vince, a ton more 4 down.
Yes.
In this defense.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Than we've seen. Even when Isaiah Foskey's not playing, we've seen a ton of 4 down from this defense.
I honestly don't remember seeing 3 down, to be honest with you. Now, I wasn't
been a couple times in some nickel and some 7-on-7 type.
I wasn't completely focused on the defense either, but I remember seeing a heck of a lot of 4 down stuff. Way more than we've had in the recent history. And it was kind of trending towards a 3 down situation when Marcus Freeman was the defensive coordinator, right? So you've kind of got personnel now that can do both, which is a really good place to be, by the way. But you're right. We have seen much more 4 down. I agree.
Right. Here's a philosophy that is going to remain the same, and if not expanded upon, is what I'm told is Marcus Freeman's always believed in being a downhill, fast attacking defense. I mean, we saw it in the numbers last year.
Right.
I mean, you can say like, Vince, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. And we saw this. I mean, the Clark Lee's last defense in 2020 was pretty good defense, right? I mean, it was a good group. It was the foundation of it. Notre Dame lost some really good players from that defense. Obviously, they lost Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, lost Dalen Hayes, lost some good football players, and yet they still went out this past year and had, 41 sacks compared to 31 the year before. It was a lot more disruptive from a forced turnover standpoint. And so we started to see that take place, despite the fact you were missing your best linebacker. There were, your All-American safety goes down in first quarter of game 7, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So you really look at it now and there's some really good talented players coming back. But the reality is it's going to still be an aggressive, attacking, disruptive defense. But from what I'm told, and we won't get into too many specifics because we have seen some of it, it's going to be the blitz packages are going to be, how do I say this, Vince? A little bit more disruptive, a little bit more, just really try to be keep teams on their toes, I guess, is the best way to put it.
And without, and obviously I'm not being too specific, but remember when we talked about the wide receivers and what they were learning early is kind of your point of emphasis, right? And it's what you stress is what you believe, right? One of the things that I've seen at every single practice that we've been to is working stunts and blitzes, and you know what I mean?
Right.
But just the defensive line and the linebackers working together on their timing. Right. And, this guy goes here, this guy goes. They do that every single time. That tells me that's really, really important with what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to, get downhill, and they're wanting to move and slant and all of these different things up front. And I think that's really important to understand. It's going to be different. I mean, you're going to see some similarities. You're going to see a similar philosophy, obviously, but it's going to be different. You're going to notice even novice people who don't necessarily understand what a defense is supposed to be or what it's supposed to look like, right? You're going to notice a difference, in my opinion. I really do believe that.
Right. And the thing I like about it, too, from what we've seen is it's a sound structure. It's an aggressive structure, but it's a sound structure. The few things I've seen on the film you guys have sent me and the people I've talked to is like, you never know what's going to come, but there's always a method to the madness, which is really important, which that's always the first thing that people ask me, right? Whenever I talk about, blitzes and things like that, people automatically, because here's what it comes down to. And a former NFL coach that's going to run a diverse defense and attack from, isn't that what Brian Van Gorder? No, Brian Van Gorder was bad at his job. It wasn't, the problem wasn't an NFL coach or being aggressive blitzes. It was his ability to plan those things out and to call them. So no, it's not the same. It's not the same thing. And that's always the first thing I get from people whenever I bring that up. But so when you look at that, Vince, I think that's important. But I think part of that too, Vince, is getting personnel back. I think we would have seen an even more aggressive defense last year if Maris Luafau doesn't get hurt, for example.
Right. Sure.
Because Marcus Freeman has said, and the coaches have said, Marcus Freeman has praised Maris Luafau publicly for just his disruptiveness. And then we've talked to people, kind of around the program that have talked about, like, and we've reported on this during the summer. I mean, before spring practice and recently that they've said, look, Maris Luafau was their best pass rusher last year. As a blitzer and things like that. And that's the one thing Bo Bauer's been really good at in his career is as a pass rusher. So I think that's going to factor into it as well, Vince, is that I think Marcus Freeman did what he did last year because J.D. Bertrand wasn't a great blitzer, right? And as we saw, I mean, there was misses against North Carolina, misses against Oklahoma State because he lacked that length. Well, the will is the position they like to blitz from. Mike exposes you a little bit more. It's easier to protect a Will or a Sam or / Rover fire than it is to protect the Mike fire. And so that obviously helps is your personnel. Getting your personnel right is going to be a big part of that.
Well, and it's exciting to hear that. And again, I want to make sure people understand it's not a compare contrast between Freeman and Golden or anything like that. But there are some really, really good players on the defensive side of the ball,
Right.
and to allow them to just kind of be themselves and be athletes and be
Right.
athletic is very exciting to me.
Right.
Because there's guys that can make some plays with
Yeah,
their
there's more
athleticism.
knowns in
Yes.
this year than there was last
Yeah.
year. Because you got to remember, like last year going in the season, you had lost Maris to an injury. You know, Isaiah had a lot of talent, but he didn't have a good
Just
spring.
unproven. I
Right,
mean,
very
yeah,
unproven. Didn't have a great spring. Didn't
sure.
have a great fall camp. Just because I have a feeling that Isaiah Foskey's just one of those. And Vince, you've had him. I've had him. Everybody has him. Where it's not a lack of effort in practice. It's just I can't ramp it up like
Right.
in practice the way that I do in games. He's just a gamer. We've talked about that, and so I think you now say, hey, look, when the lights are bright, I know Isaiah is going to bring it. That's the thing we've talked about Isaiah Foskey. He had some of his biggest plays, best plays were in biggest moments. The
Right.
strip sack against Cincinnati that got him back in the game. The big plays against Oklahoma State, key sack against Florida State. I mean, he was big in big moments,
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
He's got some Khalid Kareem to him in that regard.
Yes, absolutely.
So
good...
when I so what he can do, right? Jason Adamiola raised his level of play last year, so you kind of know what he's going to do. The minimum of what you're going to get from Cam Hart now, right? Like what Brandon Joseph can do, whereas last year there was a lot of uncertainty beside Kyle Hamilton. Well, Hamilton and Joseph very similar. You know what they can do, but now we've seen Isaiah or Ramon Henderson play some safety. We've seen Xavier Watts. And Maris Luafau's back, and now JD has a year of experience under his belt, even though he's not really practicing right now. The point being, there's a lot more knowns on this defense than there were a year ago. Even though you lost a couple really good veteran players, and a few really. Drew White obviously is a big loss from a veteran leadership standpoint. He was a good underrated football player, as we've talked about. Kurt Hinish was a good football player. Myron Tungavaloa was a good football player.
Kyle Hamilton was better than average,
but you've already gotten used to not having.
That's true, because he was gone for half the season. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. You've already played without him, and you just replaced him with another All-American, right? Who what he can do.
That's true, and that also could qualify as a known, right? I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Like, not that he is Kyle Hamilton; they're different players, but it's Brandon Joseph is a known commodity. I mean, you have 2 years worth of film of what he can do at Northwestern. Right. Now it's about fitting him into what you do, and he's had a monster spring from everyone that we've talked to.
He's fun to watch.
Yes.
I'll just say that.
And so there's a lot more known. You had no clue. We had no clue what Cam Hart was going to do last year. Now, you were on the Cam Hart train. I was on it with you, but you were driving that sucker. I mean, Vince was the captain of that,
and it worked out. I mean, it worked out last year.
But it was still, even you would admit that he's now got to go show it.
Absolutely,
right?
He's got another level to his game,
and he did. And so there's a lot more knowns. I think that Al Golden is working with more knowns than what Marcus Freeman was working with last year, which also helps and allows you to add more, because Marcus Freeman would have added more to his package than what we've seen. So it's good to see. And the other thing we've heard is Al Golden has thrown a lot at the defense in spring. And it's like, I mean, and that's kind of partly why early on the offense was having some success, as they were learning that. But as they've kind of started to figure out, you're hearing more and more about how even when the offense maybe starts well, the defense recovers and then starts making their plays, which is what you want to hear about practice. You don't want to hear that one side dominated the other week after, practice after practice.
You want it to be, hey, defense was really good this week, and then the offense was really good this day. Right. If you hear it's the same group over and over and over, you're like,
that's a problem. That's a problem.
So
we're hearing that back and forth, and just from day to day, but also like we had an interview that Sean did with Jacob Oden. And he talked about how the practice he was at, I think it was a Saturday practice. And he was like, the offense was really taking it to him early, but then the defense rebounded and finished strong. Like, that's kind of how you want to hear a practice go.
Great. Yeah, that's great.
To be honest with you. But so I think the coverages are going to look a lot different. And we're not going to get too much into the specifics, but, we're going to see a lot of different coverage structures. And again, with the theory of, or the philosophy of, hey, we're going to be aggressive, but we're also going to try to do things to get the offensive, especially the quarterback, sort of unsure of what he's seeing.
That's great. And in college football, if you can make the quarterback hesitate, even if it's just for a beat, if you can make him hesitate because he's thinking, you've won.
Right.
Because the way college football is these days, it's about quick decision making, getting the ball out, RPO type stuff. If you can make the quarterback hesitate and not really sure of what he's seeing or what he's looking at, that's a win for the defense. And so that's exciting to me, is that's a goal, is to make the quarterback hesitate, because I think that's even more so important nowadays than it was even 10, 20 years ago. Right. Because at 10, 20 years ago, you're going through your 5-step drop, you're going through your progressions. It's just it's a bit of a slower mental game. But now it's like, you got to be move. And if you can hesitate at all, that's really good for the defense.
And the more we've heard about how practice has gone on, the more we're hearing about the secondary making more plays. So early in fall and spring practice, I was hearing from people like how good the receivers looked and no one can guard Lorenzo Styles, and Braden Lindsey's making a lot of plays. I've had a couple people I've talked to that have been at some of the more recent practices, and they're like, man, the receivers get no separation. Like, that's a good sign. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's the secondary players are starting to step up and play much better. But I think we're going to see a different coverage structure this year a little bit. And it's going to, again, there's a, hey, we're going to, the big key number one, we need to allow the defensive players to play fast.
Right.
Less thinking, more moving, right? Like, moving meaning ball snap, go.
Right.
Right. I think that we also see it's kind of interesting. I feel like Al Golden, philosophically, from what I hear about how practices go and things like that, he's got a lot of things in common with Coach Freeman. He's also got a little bit of Clark Lee to him, in that apparently he's like super detail oriented about where like lining up from line up this way,
good,
attack this way, tackle this way, but go play fast.
Right.
And so I like that from what I'm hearing as well. Again, this is just what we're hearing. We got to see.
We don't get to see it. We haven't really had an opportunity.
Kind of the things that we're seeing. I've been on the phone a lot the last few days. Just kind of because you start. Here's how an idea like today comes, Vince. It's I start hearing things and I'm like, we should do a show on that. But I want to see more of it. Now we're a weekend. We're a little over a week away from the Blue Gold game. We've seen. They're 10 deep into practices, 10 plus deep into practices. You kind of feel like you have a good idea. So then it's time to. Okay, let me talk to this person and that person and the other person. And then you start saying, okay, yeah, I feel like I'm hearing enough consistency from people that I feel like I'm at a place where I can say this is what they're doing. So it's good to see it. And now it's about, okay, so this spring has been a lot about, okay, learn, they've changed calls. They've changed. I mean, he's allowed Al Golden, from what I understand, to change a lot more than maybe you'd otherwise think from a calls and terminology standpoint, which is kind of what Marcus Freeman did last year. He changed a lot more than we thought he was going to change based on what he said. We're going to keep a lot of things the same. And, so I think that's a good thing, but they're starting to kind of figure it out from what I'm told, and they're letting them loose too. But the other thing too is, like, there hasn't been any Cam Hart this spring.
Right.
JD Bertrand hasn't been able to do any live stuff. Foskey's been a little bit limited. I was actually told that Foskey hasn't done a ton in scrimmages, but apparently, like, one of the recent practices, they let him play more in scrimmages, and it just so happened that was what I was also told. For some reason, it was the best practice we've had on defense all year. I'm like, I think I might know why. It's number 7.
Yeah.
So
he's pretty decent.
He's pretty good. But, there's no Jason Ademiyola this spring. And so, to hear the defense
big pieces.
So you're seeing these, you're seeing Howard Cross get a ton of work. You're seeing Jacob Lacey get a ton of work. You're seeing Riley Mills get a ton of work. And the more we hear about him, the better we hear. Your Bo Bowers getting his chance to go show something this spring. It's put up or shut up time. Clarence Lewis is getting a lot of work, but you know what? So is Ryan Barnes. So is Philip Riley. So is Chance Tucker. So those things are all good. I mean, they're all good, Vince, and I love hearing all those things. But now it's also about, okay, the philosophy is what we talked about.
Yeah,
love everything I'm hearing. Aggressive, let the players play fast, be disruptive physically and mentally. Right, that's a key, and that's something that Marcus Freeman wanted to bring to the table last year. But there were some things that happened injury-wise and guys learning and different things that kind of kept them from getting to that point. Plus, honestly, a thing that hurt Marcus Freeman last year too, and we started to see this late, because about middle of the season, once, like, after the North Carolina game, it's like the defense got real pissed off and just went nuts the rest of the way when Coach Freeman was running the defense. But the thing that hurt him too is when your offense can't score, you have to be a little less aggressive. You can't take a chance of giving up a big play when you don't have faith that your offense can.
It's a really good point. And you kind of touched on that yesterday or 2 days ago when we were doing the show together. And I said that I really feel like the offense is going to pull their weight this year. But that in turn allows the defense to be more aggressive because they're not as worried. Okay, if we take a shot here defensively and it doesn't work out for us and the other team scores, what are we going to do? Because the offense can't match that score. Right. So now, okay, hey, if we go here and we succeed, it's going to be great. But if we happen to not and they go down and score, our offense is going to have our back and they're going to be able to go down and match that score. That is huge for a defense. That is huge for a defense, not only from a play calling standpoint, but from a playmaking standpoint, because there's a lot of times when you're on defense and you don't have a whole lot of faith that your offense can go down and put points on the board. You hesitate, you aren't as aggressive as maybe you should be. I mean, there's just, and maybe you don't even mean to do it, but you do. And I think that will be alleviated this year with how I feel the offense is going to take off. I think the defense is going to be able to play with its hair on fire.
Yeah, it gives you more freedom to say, look, we can take this chance. I can bring this corner fire knowing that if it doesn't hit, they may rip a big play on us because I know that Tommy Rees and the offense can get it back for us.
Right.
It's a big thing that they didn't have last year.
Right.
They haven't had for several years. That's also partly why Clark Lee was because Clark Lee was a real conservative coach, like don't give up the big plays. And that fit really well with like in 2020, kind of what they had, a ball control offense that, it fit really well. Well, Marcus Freeman wants to be more disruptive. And he tried to run early on, tried to run the stuff he ran at Cincinnati. And then he realized, I don't have Ahmad Gardner and Kobe Bryant at corner. We can't do this. And he had to change, and then they kind of get to the bowl game and they're still trying to play man again, back to playing man again, and just wasn't working and they didn't have the answers. But that staff, like I said, it's not the same staff anymore. So
right.
It's going to be interesting, Vince. But I want to talk next about, okay, now we have an idea of what the philosophy is. We have an idea of what things are going to look like. What are the things that Notre Dame now has to do practically to be an elite defense? They were really good last year. They were not elite.
Agreed.
Too many bad games.
Agreed.
For the defense last year. And same thing with, when you look at like 2019, there were just too many bad games. Michigan obviously being one of them. Even in 2020, there were just times where you're just like, okay, you guys were good during the regular season when you were playing a bunch of nobodies, but then you play one good offense and you get shredded with their backup quarterback. And then that same offense shreds you in the championship game, you get shredded by Bama, and it's just like, okay, you've got to take it to, there's another level you got to get to.
Yeah. Right.
And so to me, there are things that they have to do practically. Some of them are very specific. Some of them are more big picture that we need to see and, say, hey, look, okay, we're hearing this. Now here's the next step for Al Golden. And we had a comment. Somebody had a comment earlier about when they're listening to players talk, the players talk a lot about tackling. And Vince, you've noted this. I saw this in the videos Chris sent me the other day. Other people I've talked to that have been at practice have talked about this. And that is that they spend a lot of time on the art of tackling.
Yeah.
And I think it has to be something that you spend a lot of time on now in the modern era, because you can't just go out and tackle. There's too much knowledge now, I believe, of what it does to the body when you tackle to the ground every single day.
Right.
And so you can't do that anymore. And that's one of those things I'm actually okay with. At first I was against that because it was
Me too.
Like, I grew up and I don't believe
it's not how we did it.
But you hear some coaches like, hey, look, no. That's actually a good thing. Here's why. Not only is it better for the young people, but if you're not tackling, it allows you to do more things that actually teach you how to tackle, right? And the proper technique and things like that. So, we've heard a lot about that because look, the reality is, and this isn't true of just last year. This has been a problem for about 3 years now, really since 2018, 19, 20, and 21 especially. This is a defense that missed way too many tackles and especially missed tackles in big moments. And that's something that has to change. Here's the thing, Vince. If that's all that improves from last season, this defense will be much better.
No, that's a really good point.
If they were just better tacklers, they'd have beat Oklahoma State.
Right, absolutely, because they had opportunities in the backfield, they had opportunities in space on the outside to make plays and make
drive-ending plays.
Yes, absolutely, or difference between a field goal and a touchdown plays. You know what I mean? Like that was very clear and very obvious, and it just felt like Notre Dame was in position to make big plays in the backfield so many times, and they would just run by the
out of
ball
position,
carrier or,
too high, the technique was poor, the
Yes.
big bad angles of the football. There
And
just
if
was a
they just
lot of
make those
things that
plays, it makes a huge difference because
yeah,
now you're talking about a 2nd and long or a 3rd and long, which is a completely
right,
different scenario than a 1st down
right.
or a 2nd and
Well,
1,
it's like
whatever.
the drive at the end of the first half against Oklahoma State. It's like 28-7, first down, perfectly called blitz. JD Bertrand comes flying through and just whiffs, just
Yeah.
misses
Yep.
because he's too high. He doesn't come to balance. And the thing is, like, I'd rather you come to balance and force him to throw it away than run by him, let him scramble for 20 yards.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Exactly.
that's the big thing there is,
Or
and
slow them down, get in front of them and
right,
slow them down, allow your
right,
buddies to get there,
right. There were
all of
two
those
issues
different
there were
things. Yeah.
3 issues to me. Number one, you had some guys who just weren't athletically or size wise good enough tacklers. Like they're just not going to be good. DJ Brown, love the kid. He's always going to struggle in space against better athletes. Just, now, but can there be things he can improve from a taking proper angles and a fundamental standpoint to make him better? Yes. JD Bertrand is always going to have some issues as a will linebacker sort of in space because he's just not long, right? Drew White had some of those issues. So what can you do to make sure that he's not, he's taking better angles to where if he doesn't make the play, he's at least turning the guy back into someone who can. Those are different. Those are little things where, like, it's not even necessarily about you making a tackle there, but you being in proper position to where in order to avoid you, that the guy has to go somewhere else instead of slipping by you and then running into the gap you just came from.
Right, exactly.
Which is what was happening last year. So there was a lot of fundamental aspects that needed to be improved upon that we're hearing is being a real big point of emphasis this year. And so it was something that they worked on last year, but I think it was one of those things that it was going to take some time to really get going. And it sounds like they're doing that. Like, from what I'm told too, they're putting the defensive players in a lot of bad spots, or not bad spots. In drills, they're doing a lot of things to put them in tough matchups against the offense to kind of, you want to bring about failure. Because, like, if you can start making tackles in this drill,
Right,
then we're going to be good
well,
when we get to games. It's kind of the way you look at it.
Just for example, in the video, and I don't know if you actually made it into the highlights or not.
It
but
didn't.
Okay, so what they had is they had the defensive player basically laying on his back, if I remember correctly, and it was just a little 5-yard dump.
It was on his stomach.
They had
okay, right. It was like they had kind of got cut. It's kind of that thought
and
process.
so it was just a little 5-yard, just getting warm for the quarterbacks, and then the receiver would catch it, and he would break up field, and the defensive player, which was mostly linebackers, had to get up off the ground and then go make that play. And so that's a great, easy drill. There's not a lot of contact. It's just about angles. It's about getting to where you need to be, all of those different things. And it goes along with everything that you just said about all of that stuff, right? It slowing him up, making angles. You don't have to be the most athletic guy in the world, but you need to be in the right spot at the right time. And then it allows your buddies to come and help you out as well. So all of those different things, we're seeing drill work that is directly proportionate to the issues that we saw on the field last year. And I think that that's a great job by the staff.
So tackling, to me, Vince, has to be at the top of the list, because if that gets better, that makes other things we're going to talk about better. And there's 2 things to me, Vince, or, well, there's really 3 things for me that I look at defensively that I say there's still room for improvement. Right. And not talent wise, just, technically, schematically, execution wise. Number one, there's still a lot of room for improvement against the run. And, there were times last year against the run, Vince, where they were really, really good. And we can point out some of those times. Obviously, completely shut down Purdue's run game. They held Wisconsin to just 78 yards and 2.8 yards per carry. Held Cincinnati to just 93 yards, 3.1 yards per carry. Cincinnati had a couple scrambles in that game too that got them some of their yards.
Yeah.
Held Virginia to 82 yards, held Stanford to 55. They stink. Held Georgia Tech to 128 and only 3.7 yards a carry. Navy got 166, but it was only 3.0 yards per carry, and it's almost 100 yards below their season average. Held USC to just 129, 3.9 per carry. Held Virginia Tech to 127, 3.4 per carry. Held Toledo to 124. That was well below their season average, only 4.1 per carry. And 67 of those 124 yards, Vince, against Toledo came on one play.
run.
And about 90 of those yards came on 2 plays.
Yeah.
right? And so there was a lot of good things, but then there's 264 against Florida State. There's 224 against North Carolina. And then, of course, 234 against Oklahoma State. And there was a lot of inconsistency. And so they've got to get better against the run. And there was something that was said the other day, and I think it was Coach Freeman that said it, that was really encouraging. And he said, we've been really good right up the middle. And I think that's key because they haven't always been really good up the middle.
That's true.
On all three levels of the defense against the run in recent seasons.
No, that's a really good point. And but you have and that's where it starts. I mean, when you're talking about a defense, it starts in the middle and working your way out, right? So it's important to understand that that's a great place to start, but then you have to be able to make tackles on the perimeter. If you're going to be forcing them and bouncing them out, then you have to be able to tackle in space. And that comes right back down to what we were just talking about.
Right. So, and I think one thing, and this is kind of my second thing, it kind of ties together. Notre Dame was really good at getting after the quarterback last year. It helps that you had an individual pass rusher like Isaiah Foskey, but he only had 11 and a half of the 41 sacks. And just to put it into perspective, I think the previous high in sacks before last year, Vince, it's like 34. They had 34 in 2019, 34 in 2018, and I believe they had 33 in 2012 with that unit, which was pretty good. And last year you had 41. There was only one guy on your whole roster that had more than 5. That was Isaiah Foskey. There's a lot of guys that were able to get pressure. So I think schematic that showed that the scheme was good. You were able to get guys free. You had a lot of different guys that could get after the quarterback. But, and I think there's another level there, I think consistency-wise. But the bigger thing for me that I was disappointed by is 41 sacks should have resulted in over 100 tackles for loss.
Mm-hmm.
And they only had 82. They actually had fewer tackles for loss last year than they had in 2020. And we they had 90 tackles for loss in just 12 games in 2020. Last year, they only had 82, and 12 and a half of them were from Isaiah Foskey. The production at linebacker went way down from a tackles for loss standpoint. And that was obviously not a good thing. And so to me, the tackle for loss production has to get a lot better. And I think that ties in to better run defense.
Sure.
Because a lot of times tackles for loss are happening on first and second down. And, for Notre Dame to have the same number of sacks as they had run game tackles for loss, because that's so basically, it's the run game production. So sacks count as tackles for loss.
Absolutely.
So if Notre Dame had 82 tackles for loss last year and 41 sacks, it means they had 41 stops behind the line in the pass game and 41 stops behind the line in the run game. To me, you want to have at least 60 more. You want to have at least 60 run stops. Keep your sack numbers the same. 40 to 45, be in that range, but give me 60 plus run tackles for loss, which gets you to over 100. I think that's a very fair number. And if you look at some other teams last year that were really good in the sack game, they also were really good in the tackle for loss game. And I think Oklahoma State is a perfect example. Like Bama last year had 57 sacks last year. Now that was in 2 more games than Notre Dame played, right? So they were at 3.8. They were at 3.8 tackles for loss. Sacks per game. Notre Dame, just give me a second here to pull this back up. Notre Dame was at 3.2. So again, that was with the best pass rush in the country on their roster. Right. So Notre Dame's not too far off there. And again, if Notre Dame tackles better, they're right there in sack numbers with Alabama. But here's the difference. Alabama last year had 121 tackles for loss. Right. And so, and again, that's more games, but so that's 64 run stops, 57 pass stops, right? So you had over 60 tackles for loss. Oklahoma State last year, I believe, led the nation in sacks last year. They were another team. They had 56 sacks, and they had 117 tackles for loss, right? And so
that's about 60,
right? 61.
Yeah.
Right. So again, that's where you want to be. You want to have about 60 to 65 run stops to really have that kind of all around disruptive defense, because I wouldn't call Notre Dame's defense last year super disruptive as much as I would say they were really good pass rushers.
Sure.
And there's a difference. And, again, I look at another team that was really good last year. Pitt last year had 113 tackles for loss, 54 sacks. That gets them at like 59. So
Yeah.
again, you're seeing that pattern, right, Vince? So you want to be at about 60 run stops per game. Do that, and all of a sudden
per
your
year.
per year. Yes,
That'd be really
per
good in one game.
One heck of a freaking game. Jerron Jones almost had that against Miami a couple years ago.
That's right.
But per year, and that impacts your run game.
Yeah,
I mean, you talk about 60 per game. Notre Dame plays, that's like 4.6 per game, right? For Notre Dame. Last year, tackles for loss, I'm sorry, that's not correct. 60. So last year they were at 41, right, Vince?
yeah.
So that is 3.2 per game. We're talking 4.6 to 4.8 per game.
You're talking about
That's
another
like
game,
almost
tackle and a half,
per game,
tackles.
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Right.
Well, what happens is those kind of things kind of build on each other, because most of those run stops behind the line happen on first and second down. Well, when you're making those stops on first and second down, that means you're more successful against the run, right? You're creating more stops behind the line, but it also means that you're now getting them in more obvious passing situations, and that's where your defense is a sweet spot, right? So it helps if your tackles for loss numbers, if you're more disruptive on first and second down, Vince, it then makes the best part of what you do, which is getting after the quarterback, even better, and it protects your secondary because you're getting more 3rd and 9s and fewer 3rd and 4s.
Right, absolutely.
And so, again, that's a big part of it, is being more disruptive against the run, not just specifically, being better against the run. What does that mean? We're trying to offer a legitimate thing. You got to be good up the middle, but also you need to be more disruptive against it. I think that's going to be an ultimate key, is seeing more of that tackle for loss production against the run, taking a big jump this season. We need to see that. And that's been true for a while, Vince. I mean, but like in past years, you'd kind of see it where they were getting closer to that number. They had 59 run stops in the year before. They had 90 tackles for loss in 2020 and 31 sacks. 2019, they had 34 sacks and they had 92 tackles for loss. Again, you're getting closer. You're in those high 50s. If this team can kind of get back to that with the improved pass rush, I think you can see this defense really become problems. And then you kind of get into that third piece, which is force more turnovers.
Right.
They were opportunistic last year when it came to forcing turnovers, but I think this defense can and needs to get better at actually forcing more turnovers.
Well, and again, I think that the offense taking off the way that I think that they're going to take off, and I'll say I think you think they're going to be really good too, is that you're going to be able to take more opportunities and more chances to get those turnovers, right? You're going to have more chances to go after the ball. You're going to have more opportunities to kind of extend yourself a little bit, and those create turnovers, right? So I think the turnover number is going to go up just because the Notre Dame offense is going to be better, and then allows the defense to take more chances. So I think I think that it's all part and parcel. It's amazing how all the pieces kind of fit together.
Because if you just look at the numbers last year, Notre Dame was pretty good in forcing turnovers, Vince. I mean, they ranked 11th, I think, in the country last year, 25 forced turnovers.
Right.
But there's another level to there to where what I thought they were good at last year was getting some clutch turnovers.
Sure.
Like drive killing turnovers. What I'd like to see is more total disruptive, because they were consistent. Here's what they did last year in turnovers forced: 3, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 2, 1, 0, 2, 2, 2, 2. Right. And they forced a lot of fumbles, 10 fumbles, but only 15 picks. And so I think, like I said, I think that there's another level for them to get to when it comes to that disruption. From a forced fumble standpoint, from an interception standpoint.
From an intercept, I think you're going to see the interceptions go up this year.
But I think
I
think the other thing for me though, Vince, is I think that there's where there needs to be a really big jump this year is, and what will lead to the turnovers is, and it all kind of bleeds together, is they need to be more disruptive against the throwing game. And they were not last year. They were only disruptive in that they were able to get sacks and had some clutch interceptions. But Notre Dame last year ranked 68th nationally in passes defensed, which is and they actually they were actually kind of high up there in interceptions. They ranked 14th in interceptions. So if they weren't getting an interception, they weren't getting their hands on the football.
They weren't getting their hands on the ball.
Right.
And that's the key.
They were 88th last year in pass breakups.
Right.
that to me is got to get that's and I think that's where zone, being able to mix up your zones could help you out a little bit, but it's also where being more disruptive up front, being more disruptive, being more rangier. That's where a Maris Luafau can help you.
Sure.
Those are some areas, Vince, where I really feel like they have to get better. The disruptive aspects of it has to get better. So, I mean, we're putting the numbers there. I mean, these are things that you look at and say, boy, that's, that in Georgia last year, for example, who I didn't think necessarily had a great secondary, but they were a very opportunistic secondary. Last year, they were second in total, and Georgia only had one more interception than Notre Dame in despite playing 2 more games. They had 16 picks. Notre Dame had 15. But they had 62 pass breakups to Notre Dame's 38.
Right. It's a big difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the defensive backs. It was, the front, getting their hands up, things like that.
Yep.
Were all parts of it. And there was we were watching them do a drill where they were working on getting your hands up when you see the quarterback trying to get rid of the ball. Yep. And that's early in fall camp.
And it was the first day or second day. It was the first or second time we were there.
It was the first practice.
It was the first practice with no pads even on. They were working on batting balls down. I have never seen Notre Dame work that drill before. And again, I'm not at every practice.
Mike Elko did a lot of that stuff.
Okay.
Not that specific drill, but Mike Elko did a lot of that stuff because he was a big believer in, if you're going to go out there and do that, you need to really make sure that you're practicing it. And when Mike Elko was the defensive coordinator that one year, they had 52 pass breakups that season, which ranked 27th in the nation. So, I think that and then the next year under Clark Lee with those same principles, they were 10th with 64 pass breakups. So, and that was obviously with Julian Love playing cornerback, which certainly helps. But then the next year, the further you get away from Mike Elko, you're 65th the next year with only 43 pass breakups. You see a jump back in 2020 where they did a pretty good job in 2020, and then you're kind of back down. It needs to get back up to being more disruptive and being better in that regards. What helped 2020 was they honestly just played a lot of bad teams.
Yes, they did.
People got to understand, 2020, the defense was not as good as people think it was. They just played some really crap teams. And that was a terrible schedule, which is why Clemson shredded them with their backup quarterback.
Right.
I mean, just the reality of it.
People forget the manner in which the defense played in that game. Right. Because Notre Dame won. And so you forget a lot of stuff, right? I mean, you forget some of the warts from that game.
Right.
Because Notre Dame won that game.
Cormo had to bail him out a couple times with big plays. And,
absolutely.
Got beat down the field and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there were some holes.
But yeah, DJ Uiagalelei had a day.
He hasn't had a day like that since.
No, he hasn't. That's a good point. He has not. So I'm sure he's licking his chops.
I had somebody say, why did DJ Uiagalelei, did I say it right?
Good job, yeah.
Okay.
Good job.
Get so much hype last year. I was like, 2 reasons. 1, he was a 5-star recruit. Yep. 2, Notre Dame.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Because you cannot blame that loss on him.
No.
You cannot blame that on him. No question.
We put that on the offensive line. And the fact that Jeremiah Wusu is just a monster. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, Jeremiah played like a star. I mean, we always said this in big games, your stars got to be stars.
Like stars, exactly.
And Jeremiah did that against Clemson. I mean, he led to 10 points.
Yes.
I mean, he generated 10 points.
Scored a touchdown.
And then a series later, he gets beat on 3rd down by Amari Rogers, and he strips him from behind.
Right.
Nick McLeod recovers it. The offense lost 3 yards on the ensuing drive, and they still kicked the field goal.
I forgot about that.
You have a minus drive, and you still get points. Right? I mean, thank you, defense. Appreciate it.
Right. Exactly.
Because it was a 13-13 game till he did that.
Yeah.
And so, but that's the other thing, too, is I do think that's my final piece. It's actually, and I didn't even mean to segue into that. My final piece for me on defense is they need stars to emerge on the 2nd and 3rd level.
Yes.
And they had it last year at times, but I'm going to be honest with you, Vince, and this isn't going to be a popular thing. Kyle Hamilton played like a star at times last year. I'd say the 2 worst games he ever had were also both last year. He was terrible against Toledo. He was terrible against Cincinnati.
The 2, yeah.
And there was other times where you're like, he's not playing. And he would make the highlight plays, but just the consistency wasn't there, especially in the pass game. And so even then, like he played like a star, but it wasn't consistent. But you had no star player in the second level. None.
Right.
You had some good, solid players, but you didn't have a star there. They need more. They need Jason Adamiola to play like a star. He flashes that.
Right.
They need that consistently.
And they need Maris to step up and be a star. They
then
need Cam Hart to step up and be
They
a
need
star.
two guys on defense. They need Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph. And Ryan Roberts has kind of been riding the Brandon Joseph train like you've been riding the Cam Hart train. Like Ryan's down there nodding like, yeah. And that is that he needs to be that guy. He needs to be, and this is my only thing is, what is Notre Dame getting? The stud we saw in 2020 or the dude we saw last year was just a solid player?
Sure.
Right, but made a lot of mistakes. Well, so far in spring camp, from everything we've heard from, I mean, I'm talking offensive players, defensive players, just observers that I know that are out of practice, you know, things like that. And it's the same thing. There's certain things, like every person I talk to, boy, Jadarian Price is going to be a dude. That number 16 on defense, most people don't even know who he is.
Yeah.
I don't know who that is, but that number 16 on defense makes a ton of plays. And I'm like, yeah, it's Brandon Joseph. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's really good. You know, you hear that from a lot of people. But you need stars on every level to me to have an elite defense. And we know that they're going to have at least one up front. I would not throw Cam Hart in the star category yet. He showed the potential to be that guy.
Right.
Absolutely. And at times he was.
I'm saying he needs to be.
Right.
Like that's what he
in
needs.
2018, Julian Love was a stud every single week. He got beat that first game against Michigan. They beat him on that post route. Remember that for that big play? And after that, I think it really pissed him off. And he's like, I'm not giving up another play all year. And he pretty much didn't, right? And so you need that. I mean, in that year, the other thing about 2018 too, Vince, because to me, that was the best defense Notre Dame has had under the previous regime. I would even say it's better than the 2012 defense because I thought that defense had more speed. They could actually match up against teams with speed. Where that's once you got into a game against speed, that 2012 defense was going to have some issues. But the 2018 defense, I would argue, was their best because they didn't play really. They played like one good offense that year. That was Oklahoma, and they weren't great. You know, they had some holes in some other games too. Who was the quarterback on that team? Was it Landry? Oh man, what was his name? I'm gonna bring in Ryan. Wasn't it Landry? What was the guy's last name? Landry, the Oklahoma quarterback.
Landry Jones.
Landry Jones. That was him. You know, but that 2018 team is like they had multiple stars up front.
Yeah,
and that's the key. Is you just need one on the second and third level. You need multiples up front, and that's why I think a lot of what we talk about, Vince, when we talk about the defense taking the next step is I really think Jason Adamiola from a star standpoint and then Riley Mills from a playmaking standpoint, to me, are the two keys to this defensive line being really good or this defensive line being elite.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the key for me. Maris is the key on the second level because if Maris steps up, I think that's going to also then make J.D. Bertrand and Bo Bauer even better at Mike because you'll have that combo right there. And then Cam Hart's got to be consistently at his highest. He showed he can be a star last year at times. He's now got to take that to another level, and they need Brandon Joseph to be that guy. So I think, Vince, for me, that's the final piece to when I look at what this defense needs to really take that next step. What say you?
No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, Notre Dame doesn't have those stars at the second and the third level at the moment. I think that they have one in Isaiah Foskey on the front line. And you're right. I think Jason's right there. I think he's right on the edge of being that guy, but look, if he was that guy last year, he probably wouldn't be here right now. Right. And I think he knows that he needs to take it to that next level. I think that's legit. But I think he can, and I think he will. Right. But he's right there on that line to me. Yeah. Right. And so if he can take his game to that next level, I think Maris is poised to be that guy. At linebacker. And like you said, two guys in the secondary, I think those guys can take their game to where it needs to be as well. So if they can do that, I mean, if you have legitimate 2, 3, 5 stars on defense, yeah, you got a pretty good shot of your.
I mean, if you have more than 2, you're going to be really good.
Yeah,
that's the key for me.
Absolutely.
And if those 2 are at multiple positions, then you're going to have a chance. And
absolutely.
And Vince, the final thing for me, and I'm gonna say this and then immediately hand it off to you because I want you to run with it because it's building on what you said the other day. The final piece to this defense really taking that next step and becoming elite is the Notre Dame offense.
Yes. No question. We talked about the different things being intertwined and how one thing will kind of lead to another and all of these different things. I said on Tuesday's show, or was it Tuesday's show?
Yeah, it's Tuesday.
Yeah,
I know they all kind of bleed together.
But I said on Tuesday's show that I think this offense is going to, and I used the word carry, and you kind of push back on that, and I totally understand. But I think this offense is now going to be a part of the team that is not going to be dependent on the defense, right? And
which is going to free the defense.
It's going to free the defense. They're again, and I said it earlier in this show. You're going to be able to take more chances defensively because you're not going to be worried about, okay, if I'm on defense and we take this chance and they score, yeah, our offense isn't going to be able to go match that score. I think this year they're going to have confidence that the offense, okay, if we give up a score here, the offense is going to be able to go match that score, and they're going to have our back in case we mess up. But we also have a great opportunity here. If we run that corner fire, as you had mentioned before, man, we could do some serious damage here. But on the off chance they go down and score, the offense can do it too.
Yep, that's what we see. So that's our breakdown of the Notre Dame defense. Obviously, it's been the strength of the team, but the point is there's another level they can and need to get to if we're going to hold them to the standard we're talking about, which is, are you able to play at a level that helps you win a championship? And they've been close to that a few times. I think they were close to that in 2018. They were close to that in 2012. I think at times last year they were close to that, especially when Kyle Hamilton was healthy, because when he was on his game, he was really good. My thing was he just wasn't always on his game last year. Much more, not nearly. He was so consistent in 2020. I felt, even playing through injuries, we didn't get that same version of him last year. The one thing I think that we'll get from Brandon Joseph, because my thought with him in 2021 is I felt like they were asking him to do too much. And I think he's a much better player within a system, within a structure. I think most DBs are that way, to be honest with you. I mean, the freaks like Hamilton can kind of freelance, but most can't. And they won't have, with Cam Hart, with the front, with the linebackers, with the other safeties they have, there's enough talent around him to say, hey, Brandon, this is your job. Communicate, let everybody know what their jobs are. But then when that ball snaps, you're only focused on what you do. And I think at the very least, he's going to be consistently good that way. We'll have to see if he can be a star, but I think he's going to at least be consistently good.
And I think when you go to a place like Northwestern, you're not going to have as many guys around you, and so you're almost forced to freelance.
He had a couple in 20, but this thing 2020 he did.
Yeah,
they had some really good linebackers,
why that was his best year,
right? And they had a first-round draft pick, a corner.
Yeah,
so he could just say, "Hey, Greg's got that. I need to do my job. Newsom's got that guy, right? Hey, Patty's going to do his job. I can, I'm going to fit off of him." You don't feel like, okay, I got to rescue this guy. It's like the Jalen Smith effect. The only person in America that could keep Jalen Smith under 10 tackles for loss was Brian Van Gorder, because he's having to rescue other people all the time. So I think that's also why I think that he's got a chance, in my opinion, to go out and be a star this year. But, it's a lot of excitement, a lot of good things happening. We're really excited about what we've heard about this defense. I think what Marcus Freeman has done is really bringing a good staff. I love what I'm hearing about Coach Washington. There's a lot of confidence that Coach Mickens is going to get this the corners turned around. And he's young and he still has a lot to prove. Yeah. But I was really impressed by the job that Chris O'Leary did patching that the safety group together last year after Kyle Hamilton.
Because when you lose an All-American like that, that can totally destroy a position group.
And you're replacing him with a dude that was playing corner and another dude that was playing wide receiver when the season started.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so, we got to see what kind of recruiter he is, but his first impression, I mean, what do they say? Like, your first impression, it's going to last a while. First impression from a coaching standpoint was, I thought the guy did a great job.
I love.
They started off rough, guys out of position, bad tackling, but to watch them fundamentally improve as the season went on, that's a sign of good coaching. Because it wasn't a good start, Vince. Like the Florida State game and the Toledo game was like, yeah, these safeties suck. I mean, you got like DJ taking bad angles, Kyle taking bad angles, KJ Wallace going under a guy. It's like, it's kind of like going under a pick in basketball. You just don't do that. You definitely don't do it in football. And that allows the guy to beat him on a wheel route for 60 seconds. You're like, these guys are terrible. But then you start seeing them make more plays. It started against Purdue. DJ had a couple big plays against Purdue. They were better in coverage, and they just kind of got better week after week after week after week. They just kind of got better. When you say, how do you know a team is coached well? That's a good example right there. When you can noticeably see them improving their fundamentals and their execution as the season goes on, that's a sign that group is getting coached well.
Nope.
And that was a good sign. So I think coaching wise, I have a lot of confidence. Now it's like, okay, let's go see it. But those are the things I think we need to see from that group. So Vince, appreciate you. You're going to be back tomorrow. So I just found out some good news. You're not in school tomorrow.
I am not.
So you're not going to be held to that hour window quite as much.
Not quite
for
as
the
much.
Mailbag. So we're going to have some fun tomorrow.
Yeah, baby. And it's game day for me, baby. It's game day today.
Right.
So got to go out and get that.
Finally got some sun, so you might actually play. Hopefully your pitchers can pitch into the wind today because it's super windy today.
It's like 50
pop
degrees.
Up the shortstop ends up landing over the fence.
Exactly.
The way the wind is going today.
It's gonna be interesting.
My dog, Sadie, was out on the porch today, Vince, and you know she loves going out and laying on the deck out back, and she was like laying kind of out, like we have this like wide. You haven't seen our new deck because we got to put it like before the winter, but it's like this really wide front step, and there's like these wide steps and all that. She likes to like lay in that big opening, but the wind was like hitting her in the face so bad she kind of went and laid behind one of the poles.
Yeah,
because it was super windy here today. So hopefully it doesn't affect you too much. But good luck today, Vince, in your game. Thank you for joining the show, and folks, we are not done. We've got more coming for you. And that more is my man Ryan Roberts is joining the show today. Just couldn't get enough of you, Ryan. It feels like we were just talking and just kind of talking O-line play not that long ago because we had our show last night. But tons of great questions, folks. We're going to kind of hear, we're maybe about an hour. We're not going to be able to get through all of them because Ryan's got a lot of recruiting phone calls to make, and I've got some things I got to get taken care of here and some stories I got to edit and publish and all that kind of good stuff. But let's rock through these questions here, Ryan, as part of our daily mailbag. My man Mark Kurtzmanish, who we haven't seen in a while, says, been a bit. Thank you for super chat, Mark. What do you think will be the biggest difference in defense's daily practices from last year to this year?
I mean, I guess in just general, just seeing it live, and Vince and you would have a better indicator of what it's looked like in the past, but it seems like competition is a lot at a higher degree, right? It seems like their energy is a little higher. It seems like everything is kind of built off of we're going to compete, some one-on-ones, some inside run. And those are things that are always traditionally a part of a practice, but it seems like things are at a little higher stake where it's a little more of an energy to compete, if I have that correct.
Yeah, I think the tempo is a lot faster too. I mean, you can't play fast if you don't practice fast. And one of the concerns they had is, and it wasn't so much from, what the coach, the defensive coordinator wanted to do, but just the structure of the practices made it hard at times to really just practice with great speed and intensity. And if the offense isn't practicing that way, it's harder for the defense to practice that way. And so I think that's another one that we're going to see. But just, again, there are not going to be a ton of changes structurally because, again, there's already a good situation in place. But I think you're just going to – the tempo, the competition. Like, they turn everything into a competition now. Like fumble drill. Like, it's like they turn everything into a competition. It's like who's going to win? Who's going to get the most? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? And I think that's a really, really, really big thing.
Well, defense is built so much off of energy, right? Like football is a game of momentum in general, but defense especially, man, like it's a little less structured at points. Like obviously there's a structured defense, gap integrity, zone discipline, all those types of things. If you're switching against man concepts, like whatever it would be. But I mean, defense is really where you can kind of let loose a little more. So the energy, I think, is you can't quantify how important it is, in my opinion.
Yep. Next question is from Didi Boy. Off topic, fun question. Is Marcus Freeman going to bring a new look to the uniform this year? It seems like every new coach puts a slight twist on the traditional look. I'm going to start by saying I pray to God. I hope he does, and I hope it's the pants that change.
You love
I
the
hate
pants.
the freaking mustard pants. Hate them. And it doesn't matter at the end of the day. They're not going to win or lose games because of the pants, but I hate the pants. I really, because like sometimes they look fluorescent. Like at night on night games, they don't look mustard. They look fluorescent. It's the weirdest thing. I can't stand that, especially in photos. They look terrible in photos on night games. But I hate the pants, man. I really, really do. There's one other change I would make, and I know this you're either going to love this or you're going to hate it. But number one, there's two changes actually. Number one, I would always make the road uniforms have a green number with gold outline. That would be my go-to, like they wore for the Sugar Bowl in '92. That would be my permanent road uniform. I think the road uniforms are just kind of boring. It's like just the little blue and then the white and the gold. I love the gold, but I think the green would really pop a lot more. And another game that they wore green on the road that I loved was the Michigan game in 2011. I just think the green on the white pops more than the blue does. I would make that change. Then the other thing I would do, and again, this is the part people are going to love or hate, with the home uniform and the road uniform, I would make the cleats and the gloves green. So blue, gold, and then green on the extremities. I think that would be sweet. And I look at like the gloves and the cleats they wore in the Cotton Bowl in 2018. And I say add those to the home uniform. I think that would look really, really sweet. But I said you're either gonna love it or hate it.
I need to look it up. I need to see what it looks like.
Because green on blue can look bad if you don't do it right.
Right. That was my initial response is that green can clash with a lot of things.
That's why I like it. Like instead of like putting like the green thing here or green ND here, have it be the extremities. So they're kind of out on an island on themselves. It's the cleats and the gloves is how I would do it. I think that would look sweet. Like I wouldn't do like green socks. Like no, that's just weird. But I think having them like that, and then it's easy to do it for the road. I mean, we've seen them do it. I thought the green gloves and cleats looked sweet in the Cotton Bowl in 2018. That's the one time we have seen it. But the concern of whether it'll look good or not is more for the home uniforms. But I think they would look sweet. Cuba Puig, getting Ohio State early is important. But if we're not physical and we don't play with discipline, it won't matter. Physicality is our only chance. We are not going to beat teams like OSU without it. I think that's true. I think that I don't think Notre Dame is at a place right now, Ryan, where they can just go out and athlete in Ohio State or a Clemson or a Georgia or an Alabama. I think they're going to have to I think that was the thing that made those 80 to 92 teams or 93 teams when they were at their best was, yeah, they had athletes and skill players, but they were always just going to beat you up. I mean,
right.
You might beat Notre Dame back then, but you were going to walk away limping. I mean, it was going to be a dogfight. And that's the one thing that I felt about last year's team especially. That was probably the least physical Notre Dame team I've ever seen, at least under Brian Kelly. It was, maybe I've blocked out some of the teams before that. But neither side of the ball was overly physical. And, it's also partly why I'm so excited about the season because I'm like, I know this team's going to be physical. Because, look, Ryan, here's the deal. You can't play offensive line for Harry Hiestand if you're not physical. And you're not going to be able to survive playing defensive line at Notre Dame if you're not physical because you're just going to get smacked in the mouth every practice because you're going against a Harry Hiestand offensive line. So I anticipate, at least in the trenches, for them to be physical. But, yes, I agree. I think if you look at the two teams – who beat Ohio State last year, Ryan? Two teams that just came into Columbus and then hosted – Oregon went into Columbus and was at Michigan, but both of those teams just came out early and just punched Ohio State right in the mouth in the trenches.
Especially Michigan. Michigan. They could not stop Hassan Haskins. It was just early and often. And I agree. I think that the wide receiver, cornerback, like the skill position deficiencies that Notre Dame's had at times in the past, like that's where the gap is trying to be closed, right? Like you want to be closer or at even with those types of teams. But like the reality is Notre Dame probably has the advantage on the defensive and offensive line, in my opinion, over Ohio State. The advantage that they have right now is that Jackson Smith and Jigba is a dude. Travion Henderson is a dude. Marvin Harrison Jr. is extremely talented. Abuka is the other receiver. I forget his name.
Potentially, yeah.
Emeka, and then they also have Julian Fleming, who's like a 5-star by a lot of different
They got some
profiles.
freshmen coming in that can play too. Caleb Brown, you got that Koji kid, the cat from Arizona. I forget his name. He's a really good player. Caleb Bird from Texas is a good player. I think he's a tad overrated. I love Grimes. I think is the kid's name from Graves. Graves is the kid coming in from Arizona that I love. Reminds me a ton of Chris Olave. Like a really good route runner. Like not an elite athlete, but plays that way because he's such a good route runner and all those kind of things. And so they're going to be loaded out on the perimeter. There's no question.
You don't want to get into a back and forth shootout with Ohio State. Like you don't want to get into a 7-on-7 contest with them. You have to beat them up. And I mean, one thing I'll say about CJ Stroud, fantastic player. I just watched him the other day though, Brian, a little peek into next year's class. The kid can get some happy feet in the pocket, man, if you get some pressure on him. So
I've had some people bring that up to me and I said, we'll find out in the opener if that's an issue. But I kind of chalk that up to the fact that the kid was a redshirt freshman who literally had never thrown a pass in college. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and I think he had a little bit of the same issue that Jack Cohn had last year, who was a 5th-year senior. that when your offensive line isn't as trustworthy as they need to be, especially if for young kids, you're gonna have that sometimes. But that's the biggest flaw in this game, and that's also why some of those teams that were able to physically beat, because what people forget is Oregon beat Ohio State up in the trenches defensively as well without Kayvon Thibodeau, and they were missing one of their better linebackers in that game too. Not Noah Sewell, the other kid, I can't remember.
Justin Flo.
He didn't play in that game either.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you look at it and say, boy, you've got to win in the trenches. So I think Kuba is on point here. I think that Notre Dame, they can't just be physical, right? Like, you're not going to grind it out and beat them 24-21. It's just not going to happen. What it is, Ryan, is you're going to have enough skill to hang with them early, but then physically wear them down to where in the late and third quarter, fourth quarter, you've worn their offensive line out, and now Foskey and Mills and the Adamiolas and Cross and Tyson Ford and Josh Burnham or Jordan Patelho or Alexander, whoever they're throwing at him on the defensive line. Yeah. It's like, those waves are starting to get to them, and you just wear them down, and that's when you get those big sacks. That's kind of what Notre Dame did to Clemson in 2020 when they beat them in the regular season. Is by the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter, Clemson's offensive line was worn out, and they just couldn't block. In overtime, they just couldn't block Dalen Hayes and Adetokunbo Ogundeji, and that wasn't a super, super physical front seven. So that, to me, is going to be the big key. And I think that's why, again, Ryan, why I think it's so important that Harry Hiestand came back, because Harry Hiestand just doesn't just impact your offensive line. He impacts your defensive line, because you have to compete every day if you're going to survive practice at Notre Dame, because Harry Hiestand's group, they're going to have to perform, because if they don't play hard, they're going to have that old guy right up there, whats, and you don't want that. So, it's important.
I think that there's advantages on both sides for each offense, right? I mean, we talk a lot about Notre Dame's cornerbacks potentially matching up against those wide receivers, and it's a fair criticism, because even if Cam Hart has a fantastic game if he's matched up against Smith and Jigba a ton, Smith and Jigba is still going to get his, right? Like, he's going to make plays. I mean, he's a potential first-round pick next year. Like, he's going to make some plays. Notre Dame, though, also has a clear advantage when we're talking about running backs, slot receivers, tight end, Michael Mayer against their linebackers and their safeties. Like, there is a clear advantage there too. I think it's going to really come down to the fact of, like, hey, I think that Notre Dame has a chance to out physical them, but they also need to take they need to take more advantage of where they have the advantage over where Ohio State. You're not going to neutralize them, but I mean, let's not undersell the fact that, like, Michael Mayer against Steel Chambers and a couple of these other linebackers that did not play well last year is a clear advantage for Notre Dame too. So Notre Dame has some advantages on the offensive side of the football too. That's why I think it's going to be a very competitive game.
Yeah. Although I had an ESPN article up today that, look, this is why Marcus Freeman has to win these games that Brian Kelly couldn't. And it's not a shot on Brian Kelly. I mean, it is, but it's not like a cheap shot. It's just the perception of Notre Dame is, this is what the article said. So Notre Dame was ranked 5th in the FPI, Football Power Index. It's not the S&P Plus or whatever that nonsense is. It's their Football Power Index. And, so then they have the ranking, which they were 16th going into last year. They finished the year 6th. So, I mean, that's a respectful ranking. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. But then you read the words of the writers, and they're like, there's a bigger gap between 4 and 5, Clemson and Notre Dame, than there is between 5 and 19. And it's just kind of like, okay, it's that continued smack in the face. But look, that's going to continue until Notre Dame shuts them up. And that's the reality of it, right? And this is the kind of game that can be that kind of game, Ryan. But I think there's an assumption that I just want let that spread be over 10 points. Keep talking all that stuff about Notre Dame can't hang with Ohio State. I can't wait to see all the times Notre Dame players read that stuff and see that stuff. It's going to be a big key. John Murray with a question. Would you guys agree that tackling success goes a long way towards defensive efficiency?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Get the guys on the ground. Your
yes.
Potential is going to be higher. Absolutely, John. No doubt about it.
And we talked about this earlier, John. John asked this kind of question early in the show, and we talked about this. Like, just a perfect example is you look at the North Carolina game. If Notre Dame just tackled when they arrived at a ball carrier, that game is never close. It's never competitive.
Yeah.
Because there were so many places Sam Howell made after contact to extend drives that Notre Dame would have won that game by 30. And Notre Dame blows Oklahoma State out if they just would have tackled well. because it would have been 28-7, if not more. Because when JD Bertrand had a chance to make that first down sack, if they force a 3-and-out, Notre Dame might get the ball back with enough time to try something. And at that point in time, Oklahoma State had no answers for Notre Dame's offense, none. So you're talking maybe 31-35-7. Instead, it's 28-14. Oklahoma State gets the ball to start the third quarter, and they go down, and next thing you know, it's 28-21. And it all started with what should have been a sack in the backfield that would have killed that drive. And, so yeah, John, I think that's huge. I think we talked about needing to get more tackles for loss. Ryan, thing we talked about right before you joined the show was, Notre Dame from a pass rushing standpoint last year was right where about right where you want to be. There were 41 sacks in only 13 games. Maybe you could add 4 or 5 more to your total, but then they only had one guy with more than 5. That means your team was really good at rushing the quarterback, but they only had 82 tackles for loss, which is an absurdly low number when you consider how many sacks they had. You need to be like in that 60 run stop range, because run stops and then adding on to the 40 sacks gets you to over 100. Well, that is a lot of that. Just tackling better. Think of all the missed opportunities Notre Dame had last year for stops in the backfield. Just tackling better, if that's the only improvement they makes Notre Dame a much better defense in a lot of ways next season.
Yeah. Well, offenses have become more and more predicated on creating space and then creating after the catch. Like, I think back to even the Alabama game a couple of years ago, Brian. If they're able to stop Najee Harris on that outside run, right? That what's his name got hurdled over on that play. Nick McLeod got hurdled over, or those perimeter screens. That's what was killing them, was Devonta Smith on those perimeter screens, just those little bubbles, man. If you just make the tackle in space, they can have 3 to 4 on those plays. That's fine. But how many of those plays turn into big plays or touchdowns? That's the difference for me in like those contests. You have to make plays. You don't even have to make the flashy plays. Like, I'm not saying you have to get up against Najee Harris. You have to tackle him for a 3-yard loss, even though they had a potential to do it on that play because they stringed it perfectly. But
the defensive line on that play, Ryan, if you go back and watch, I just want to draw this up for people as you continue to explain it. The defensive line took Alabama's offensive line and drove them about 2-3 yards into the backfield. And Drew White's coming on a perfect angle to make that, and he just gets blocked. And then Nick McLeod whiffs. So please continue. But I just wanted to, that's why tackling is so important, because the D-line did their job on that play and really did it the whole game. I felt Notre Dame's defensive line clearly outplayed Alabama's offensive line in that Rose Bowl.
Yeah. It was across the board. I thought Jason Amalola dominated them, honestly, in the reps that he had. I would say, it's very simple. It's very simple. That play, that's the biggest difference between the game of inches that people always talk about, right? And that's why length matters. And all due respect, because Drew White was a good football player for Notre Dame, there's no doubt. But if he has just a little more length to him, maybe a little more lower body strength, he's able to kind of press and take on contact and get through contact, navigate it a little better. There's a big difference between Najee Harris getting stopped for a 1 or 0 yard gain, or he breaks that 50-yard, whatever it was, play on that play. So those are the differences to me. It's also like, the other play that I think about is the Sean Crawford coming inside out against Devonta Smith on the bubble, right? Sean Crawford is a very talented athlete, but he's also 5'8", right? Like, he doesn't have length. That's why Notre Dame, because people ask, what are the differences in recruiting? And I will say this every day. They're trying to get longer everywhere. Right. They're trying to get more rangy everywhere, because those things matter. There are the differences between a 1 yard gain and a 60-yard touchdown sometimes. Right. It's just the facts of it.
Right. And, even like in that game with the Rose Bowl, there was a play where they called a perfect blitz, and I think Maris comes through, and he's got Mac Jones dead to rights, and he just spins out and runs for a couple yards. Again, that's a drive. That means now Bama's settling for a field goal instead of going down and getting a touchdown. That all leads into what John's original point was, is that's about efficiency. Because if you're a more efficient defense, that means you're forcing them into more uncomfortable situations. More uncomfortable situations means more stops, not just through punts, but also turnovers. Because an offense has a lot less in its arsenal on 3rd and 9 than it does on 3rd and 2. And especially when you've got Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamiola rushing the quarterback.
Right.
And Justin Adamiola, because Justin Adamiola was a pain in the you-know-what for teams on 3rd down last year. But that's the thing. The Adamiolas, too, both of them, they got to tackle better. Like that, it was all three levels last year. And so it certainly has something to get better. And I truly believe this, Ryan. If that's the only part of the defense that gets better this year, they will be a better defense than they were last year. By a decent amount, in my opinion. Will it be good enough to beat Ohio State? No, no. They have to make other improvements, but from an overall standpoint is what I mean.
I mean, even the game against Clemson when, what was it, Trevor Lawrence was a freshman, right? Like, how many times did he just break a tackle or spin out of a sack in those games? Like, those are the things that we're talking about, being able to finish plays and get them to the ground. Like, it is a huge concept. I mean, that's why defensive coordinators are always harboring on the tackle circuits and let's get the guy to the ground and those types of things. Like, it matters. This game really is a game of inches, as cliche as it sounds.
99 problems, but BK ain't one. Let's say the team hits a few bumps in the road early in the season, either because of injury, scheme adjustment, whatever. Do you think Marcus Freeman will have the discipline to let Golden see the D through it? I do, because we saw it. I mean, I was waiting on him to just like snatch the play call sheet out of Mike Elson's hands and just start calling plays, right? I mean, in the bowl game. And no, I think he will. And look, Marcus Freeman, the one thing I know about him, there's a lot of things we don't know about him as a head coach. I mean, look, we can all be excited about what he's going to do, but at the end of the day, none of us really truly knows, and that's true of anything that's not proven. One thing I do know about him, though, is he's a very disciplined human being, and he is a very, because we saw it with the other word we saw it the defense last year. Even through the first two games, when they were making mistakes, there was no panic. It was keep hammering away, because we're gonna figure it out. After the second game, a less disciplined coach, a less emotionally and mentally mature coach would have said, boy, we got to change. We got to make changes. And he didn't. It was, no, what we're doing is right. We've got to execute better. We've got to stick to it. And if we start changing now, then we're back to square one. And they stuck with it. And then all of a sudden the defense starts rolling. So I do think that he will have the discipline to let Golden see the defense through it, in my opinion.
Well, I think the reason that he wanted to target such an experienced coach, right, is that he doesn't want to micromanage every little part of it. Like, obviously, it's going to be a part of his beliefs and his philosophy, but I think that if this was just a short leash type of situation, he probably hires a younger coach, right, where it's more easy to kind of take him out of his spot and be like, okay, I got this. Take a seat back, right? Like, I don't think you hire Al Golden, who's been coaching so long, if you just want to micromanage everything.
Who's been a 10-year head coach, was at the University of Miami for 5 years, and is just coming from the Super Bowl. Yeah, Ryan, you don't bring him in to give him 3 games and then you take control. That would be completely against what Marcus Freeman's character has been up to this point in time. So, it'll be interesting. Be interesting for sure. Toe Jam 1992. How many games will it take for the defense to get its foot under it with the new system? Last year did not seem to click until the Purdue game. I still wouldn't call this a new system, though. I think it's just some new wrinkles and some adjustments on how they're going to go about their business with the new system. We said they're making call changes and things like that, but I don't. And here's the other thing too. I don't think the change right from Freeman to Golden is going to be as stark as it was from Lee to Freeman. Because I think here's the difference. Freeman and Lee have completely different philosophies on being successful on defense. Freeman, and from what we're hearing about what the defense is going to look like under Al Golden, again, this is just what we're hearing. I have no clue what Al Golden, he hasn't called a defense since 2005, right? But what we're hearing about what we've seen in practice, it sounds like what he believes in is very much in line with Marcus Freeman believes in. It's just going to kind of go about that belief a little differently, right? It's kind of like, when Brian Kelly kind of let Tommy Rees finally do the offense the way he wanted to do it, they didn't all of a sudden implement 75 new plays. They just started focusing on things they already had a little more. And the philosophy was different. In a lot of ways, but it was still the same principles. This will be the same. The philosophy was the same, but the way it went about their business and from an execution and that obviously had to change. And so to me, I think that's what we're going to see more so, where it was a complete overhaul philosophically, structurally. I mean, it was practice wise, it was a big change from Clark Lee to Marcus Freeman. I don't anticipate that as much. Plus, as we said earlier, Ryan, here's another piece of that. Last year, there were way more unknowns on defense, in my opinion, than what you have this year. Way more unknowns. We didn't know what Foskey was going to be. It was Jason Ademiola's first time as a starter. How was Myron Tungavaloa going to handle playing on the end? Maris Luafau goes down. We don't know what J.D. Bergeron can do. Cam Hart's talented, but we don't know what he's got. I have no clue what's going to happen opposite Kyle Hamilton at safety. There's so many. How's Jack Kaiser going to handle replacing Jeremiah? There were so many unknowns about the defense going into last year, and you were completely overhauling your philosophy. So, yeah, it makes sense why there were some bumps in the road. And again, the first two games, the defense had a lot of good moments the first two games. They gave up too many big plays. That was the problem. It wasn't like Florida State just consistently moved the ball up and down the field a little bit in the second half because they took their foot off the gas. But like Toledo had two big plays. That was really it. Two big plays and Notre Dame turnovers. That was really the problem. But it was once they eliminated those is when you started to see the defense play a lot better. So, and I think a lot of those big plays, Ryan, were because of they were making a dramatic philosophical change on defense with a lot of unknowns. This year, they're not making a big change, and there's a lot more knowns on this defense.
Right. It said perfectly. It's not a defensive change. It's just there's going to be some new wrinkles that are thrown in. So there might be some adjustment to those wrinkles early, Toe Jam, but I agree with Brian in this sense that I don't think that it's a major overhaul. So I don't think it's like a multiple games to figure it out type of thing. I think it's just, you're ironing out some things that are going to be on top of the defensive structure that was already in place. So I don't think that there's going to be a dramatic shift. I don't think there's going to be a test period. I don't think that that's going to exist as much because it's still is principally a word? In principle, it is still the same defense. I think I made a word up. So that was fun.
It's cool. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I love making words up. I also will note that Notre Dame has 13 players, just off the top of my head, marking down guys. Notre Dame has 13 players who have started games in their careers. So not all at Notre Dame because I'm counting Brandon Joseph. And that'll grow more in the fall when Chris Smith shows up, the tackle from Harvard. So this is a much more experienced defense. That's the funny part is Brian Kelly kept making excuses for how young the offense was. The defense was far more inexperienced than the offense was, and they were still better than the offense was for most of last year. So we expect that to change a little bit. Rob Osgood said, based upon what I have read about the defense, in my opinion, it's going to be more of an attacking defense compared to those in the past. Am I right, or am I looking at it wrong? I don't think you're wrong at all, Rob. I just think it's the circumstances. I think last year's defense was pretty aggressive, but they were limited in how aggressive they could be for several things. Number one, there were some issues in the secondary. They didn't have enough. When you don't have linebackers that can cover against the pass, it is really hard to be a heavy blitz team because you have to have linebackers that can cover, and they didn't last year. And there was just some things about the team last year that made it harder for Marcus Freeman to be as aggressive as he wanted to be. So it'll be more aggressive and more of an attacking defense. But I think that it'll be more of an aggressive defense. I don't think it'll be more of an attacking defense. I think is where is kind of the maybe that's a nitpick, Ryan. But I think last year's defense was an attacking defense. I just think they were limited on some of the aggressiveness that they wanted to do because of some of their personnel shortcomings or injuries or other things that I don't think are going to be the problem this year because you have Maris coming back, because Cam Hart's going into year 2, because of some other factors. I think they'll be free to be a little bit more aggressive this year. I don't think the philosophy of being an attacking defense is any different than it was last year.
No, I mean, again, in principle, it's the same defense. Rob, my answer is I'll let you know when I can see if they could play man-to-man coverage. Like, that is what Marcus Freeman's defense is built upon. Yeah. You can blitz out of zone looks. You can do it, but blitzing in man is just so much easier fundamentally, man. So last year, we know Cam Hart was a good football player. We know the cornerback on the other side was not nearly as strong a spot. We know that there were some mishaps at safety at times, out of position. We know that the linebackers weren't able to run always with slots. And I mean, even though it's very difficult, tight ends and do some things in different pass coverage. So in theory, Notre Dame should be more athletic on the second level this year. Cornerback opposite Cam Hart, you would think is going to be better in some capacity. Exactly.
The same guys. it's not going to be worse.
Exactly. So you would hope that as somebody would take a step forward and that position would be better than it was last year. So in theory, if all those things come true, Rob, yes, I think it'll be more aggressive defense. You'll see more blitz looks because I think they'll be more confident in their ability to play man. And again, that is what Marcus Freeman's defenses at Cincinnati and just structurally are built off of.
Now, we talked earlier in the show, Ryan, before you joined, one of the things that we're hearing is they are going to mix up their coverages more this year because I think they know they can't just line up and play man all game. I think, however, that if you are willing to mix up your coverages more, it will then make you more effective in man when you ask your guys to do it. I think the problem last year is they asked Clarence Lewis to play too much man, and he's just not that guy. You ask him to mix up man looks with some other things. That's where I think Clarence could really thrive because I think he is good at driving downhill and playing zones and things like that. So, but at some point in time, as you said, you have to be able to play man. And I think they're in a position now to do it. I'm going to say something else that people may take the wrong way. I think Notre Dame also is going to be far more athletic at safety to start the season than they were to start last season. And that's not a shot at Kyle Hamilton because I don't give a crap what Kyle Hamilton ran at a combine. Kyle Hamilton was an incredibly athletic safety of football. I'm talking about the other guys because you didn't have Ramon Henderson to start at safety last year. You didn't have Xavier Watts at safety to start the season last year. When you add Brandon Joseph, Ramon Henderson, Xavier Watts to this secondary and compare it to where they were after Kyle Hamilton last year, it's a big difference. Because last year you would argue that maybe Houston Griffith was your second best athlete at safety. Now he's fourth,
yeah, at best fourth, yeah,
and that's a good thing. That's not a shot at Houston. That's a good thing because now you don't have to put Houston in situations you can now play to his strengths more, than maybe you did in the past. Because if you need someone to go cover man, like Florida State, they were putting Houston down in the slot in the boundary and ask him to play man against a slot receiver, and that's unfair to Houston. You shouldn't ask him to do things that he's not good at. But if you need to be able to do that, put Ramon Henderson down there. Put Xavier Watts down there. Put Brandon Joseph down there. And now you have guys that can match up a little bit better than maybe they could before.
You've created depth. And I think that's the big thing with any really good team that we've seen historically is that there's usually depth involved, especially defensively, man. Like that Georgia team last year, Brian, it's like you take a guy out of the football game and then who's this next freak that's coming onto the field? Like, it's just silly stuff. The linebacker position, I mean, Channing Tindall didn't start a single game for Georgia last year. He's probably going to get drafted in the top 4 rounds just because he's a 4.51 athlete at 230 plus pounds on the bench. Like, they just had waves of guys last year. And again, Houston Griffith as a 3rd to 4th safety, that's pretty good, man. It's not a bad place to be in.
Here's an interesting one, Ryan, I want you to address. B. Ryan and Vince, if applicable. I love that. Tommy knows that sometimes, depending on when this question is going to get answered, Vince may not be around. Will we get an accurate gauge on how good our defense will be after game 1? I know my answer. I want to hear what yours is.
Yes, I think so. Because I think we already talked about it. I don't think there's this huge time period of figuring out, I don't think there's this big acclimatization period of like, oh, let's get used to this new defense. Like, it's the same defense. New wrinkles brought in, and you're playing against the best offense that you're going to see on the schedule. Even though it's their first game, I mean, again, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Travion Henderson, Julian Fleming, Marvin Harrison Jr., they got dudes everywhere, man. So, yeah, I think that if they come out and they have a strong showing against Ohio State team, I think you can get a lot of it, Tommy. I think that it's very telling, and I think it's a good gauge. Is it the absolute gauge? Obviously not. Like, you need a few more games than that, but I think that you get a very accurate gauge if they're able to come out against Ohio State and have a good showing. I do, yeah.
My answer is no.
Oh.
And the reason is, Ryan, is just because it's just how I feel. I never feel like one game at the beginning defines who you're going to be. And to me, it's, can you string that together? A perfect example is the year that Ohio State won a national championship. Virginia Tech shut them down, right? Held them to 21 points, held them to 327 yards of offense, 4.7 yards per play. Well, Virginia Tech went 7-6 that year. Why? Because they gave up 28 points and 502 yards and 7 yards of play the next week in a loss to East Carolina. You know what I mean? Like, that's my thing is, Ryan, I think everything you said is accurate. It's just, for me, I'm not a believer in something until I see it more than once, right? That's my thing. So I think that if they play really well against Ohio State, it's going to get me excited, and I'm going to have to tamp that down a little bit, because my philosophy is give me some string of success. And again, I go back to 2014. If Brian Van Gorder would have left after the fourth game of his first year at Notre Dame, we would have a much different opinion on Brian Van Gorder's coaching ability than by the end of that season. Because once people get some film on you and what Al Golden's tendencies are from a blitz standpoint, a coverage standpoint, like to your point, the defense isn't going to change, just some wrinkles, but those wrinkles could result in a pick six in the second quarter that, when teams get some film down the road, may not work as well. So I agree with what you said as far as the overall philosophy. Completely agree. It's just, for me, and I think this is more of an individual thought that people can have. I don't care if they beat Ohio State by 30 in the opener. Am I going to be feeling really good about how good this team can be? Yeah. But if they go lay an egg the next 3 weeks against Cal, Marshall, Cal, and North Carolina, and lose to North Carolina on the road, then it doesn't matter if they beat Ohio State by 30. It's can you do it consistently? That's going to be the key for me. But I'm not going to lie, if they play really well and keep Ohio State down and win that game, my emotions may cause me to say things the exact opposite of what I'm saying right now, right after the game. I'm going to be honest with you. So there's no doubt. Here we go, Ryan. Over under from Tommy Guns of sacks for Isaiah Foskey, 11.5.
I'm going to say over. I'll say 12 is a good number for him. It's right around the same that he did last year. I think that there's going to be a little more added attention, but I also think that Jason Amalola is going to take his game up his notch. I think Riley Mills mixing in. I think there's just going to be a little. I think it's going to be a little harder to just put full attention on Isaiah Foskey. So I'll say over on the 11.5.
I'm going to say under.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I say that is I think Isaiah Foskey is going to be a better player this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you were to set like a tackles for loss at like 14, 13.5, I'd say take the over. But I'm going under on the sacks, because I think that, number one, he's going to be allowed to play on the edge more this year, not as much dropping in coverage. I think the reason I'm going to go under is I think he's going to be a more disruptive player. I think what's going to happen is teams are going to be forced to put so much attention on him that he's then going to his presence is then going to result in everybody else getting more sacks. So I think the team is going to get more sacks. I think last year they had two guys that had more than 5 sacks. It was Justin Adamiola and Isaiah Foskey. My prediction this year is my over-under that would be more intriguing, Ryan, is the number of guys with at least 5 sacks, and the over-under being like 4.5. And I'm definitely taking the over. So I think Foskey will be more impactful. But if I had to bet now, I'd go the under. Now, would I be shocked if it's over? No, he's that good. It's just that I think if he does go over, Ryan, it's because he just has a monster November. Because of what I just said. Because after a while, people are like, look, we can't just keep doubling him because we're getting killed by Riley Mills and Jason Adamiola and Justin Adamiola and Howard Cross and Maris Luafau. And I think Maris is a big reason why I don't think Isaiah will get to more than 11.5 too, because again, I think as you slot, they're going to be on the same side a lot on first and second down. Mm-hmm. And if you're sliding that protection and you're focused on Isaiah Foskey, you may miss number 8 kind of flying through there a little bit more. And then there's also going to be times where you try to spin out away from Isaiah Foskey. Who's coming down behind him? It's going to be Marist. And so I'm going to go under on the sacks for him, but I think he's actually going to be a better player.
Can I give you an over under? Can I give you a real quick one? Different one. Maris Luafau sacks 5.5. I know my answer. I'd
probably go under there too. I just feel like the sacks are going to be because see, to me, sacks can sometimes be a very misleading stat to how impactful you are. Like, I feel like there's just going to be a thing where Maris is going to come off the edge, and after he gets 2 or 3 sacks early in the year, quarterbacks are just going to start stepping right away from him into Riley Mills, into Jason Adamiola, into Howard Cross. That's my thing. And so, I guess my unders on these numbers, Ryan, are, and I take it yours is over because of the way you responded. I think for me, it comes down to my philosophy on how I view sacks.
Mm-hmm.
That I think sacks can sometimes be a sort of a what's the right word I'm looking for? Not always the best gauge for just how disruptive somebody is as a pass rusher.
Not as indicative of
right. Because of a lot of factors. If I'm freaked out about Isaiah Foskey and Maris Lewis, I'm just throwing quick game all game. Right. They got no sacks. Now, we held them to 3 points, and we had this and we did that because they were worried about it, looking at it from a defensive coaching standpoint. But we didn't have any sacks. They spent the whole game double teaming Isaiah. He got 0 sacks, but we ended up having 8 as a team because we knew they were going to slide to Isaiah every single play. So we just started bringing double fires off the field, right? I mean, you know what I mean? So that's where a guy like Isaiah can have a huge impact, even when he's not getting his, so to speak. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I think they're going to be better pass rushing team this year. I think that it's going to manifest itself more as opposed to Isaiah being like a 14, 15 sack guy, which I would love to be wrong on that. Because if he goes over, that means he's going to have a monster year. Because if he goes over, I don't think the other number changes. I don't think the other guy's getting. I just think Notre Dame's going to have 50 plus sacks next year, right? Which would be a great thing. I could just see them just being more of it spreading the wealth because teams are so focused on not letting Isaiah beat them. So that's kind of
it's fair.
My stamp on that. Rob O'Mara asks, any word on where Braylon James is committing to next week? Rob, we just that's not how we roll, right? I mean, this is Braylon's moment. We will carry the commitment ceremony live, and we will break it all down for you afterwards, but that's just not our thing. This is Braylon's news and Braylon's moment to share. So, we have said for months that we felt Notre Dame was in a great position, and nothing's changed on that. But in regards to, telling you where or anything beyond just the great job Notre Dame has done, this is Braylon's moment. And we're just never going to be that company, especially in a public non-paywall situation where we're going to really put that. But, just be ready to tune into that show next Tuesday. I just got to thank Nick Papel for this. He says, bump BK. The only Brian of importance is Brian Driscoll. Go Irish, my man. Way to suck up. I appreciate it very, very, very much. Irish One says, I know at the first Notre Dame game watch, I will shout out this site. Everyone who has Notre Dame game watches in their city should do the same. I agree completely. Ryan, the reason that these comments were made at the very beginning of the show is I announced to everybody that we went over 2,000 subscribers today.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Very, very. And Ryan knew we were getting close. We were talking about that last night, but we went over this morning. So
appreciate
very, very
you
exciting
all.
times. Yeah, absolutely. Jim Haller and Brian and Vince. Now, Ryan, do you think Golden will sacrifice the personnel strength 4 down for the sake of being multiple?
No. I mean, it's going to be multiple because that's just how the defense is designed. But
it could be multiple within a 4 down defense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's not. I mean, the answer is no. I think that a smart defensive coordinator is going to stay within what gives them the chance. I mean, this is just a coaching thing in general. You don't stray away from things that are making you successful. So I don't think he's going to go, man, we're really playing well in this 4 down front. I want to be different though, and just shake things up. You stick to things that make you successful. So no, I don't think that it's just going to be oh no, I need to stay multiple. I think he's going to do whatever makes him successful.
Yeah. Here's a question from This I don't recognize this person. I think this might be a new listener. TB Speaks Life. Who are Notre Dame's toughest games this year? They always have a challenging schedule. I think the obvious ones are Clemson and Ohio State. I think there's a couple sneaky games on the schedule too, Ryan, that we've talked about BC. We both think BC is going to be a tough game. BYU is going to be a physically tough game. Playing them away from home is never easy. Obviously, USC might be. We just don't know with USC. I'm going to tell you a team that I think – And I think you're going to disagree with me on this one. I'm going to say that first because I want to know whether I'm surprised or not. I actually think this is going to be the best North Carolina team Notre Dame has played in the last 3 years. And here's why I say that. Because I thought 2 years ago they had a great offense that was wasted by a bad defense. Last year, they had a lot of young and up-and-coming players. The offensive line took a step back. The defense was abysmal, and I thought they put way too much on Sam Howell's shoulders. You can't do that this year. Criswell is going to be young. Whether the freshman that came in had a great spring from people I've talked to, you're going to have to get back to – I think Phil Longo went away from his roots a little bit last year, which is he wants to run the football. He's one of those air raid coaches that wants to run the football. And I think that because you don't have Sam Howell to kind of rely on, I think sometimes you can hurt yourself because you know you have to score every time you touch the ball. their defense isn't going to be phenomenal this year, but they're going to be better. They gave up 32 points a game last year on defense. That's abysmal. They drop it down to 25. I think this is going to be a better team. I think they're going to run the ball well, a lot better this year. I think you got some weapons that I really like on offense, and I think they're going to have a quarterback situation that they're just not going to put as much on that guy's shoulders, and just the offense in general. So I actually think this is going to be the best team North Carolina's faced. Not the best offense that Notre Dame has faced from North Carolina, but the best team. And it's going to be on the road. So that's and it's in a non-COVID off-season year, which is what happened last time. I think this is going to be the best North Carolina team that Notre Dame has faced in the last 10 years, because the 2017 North Carolina team was garbage. But I think you're going to disagree with that. So let me hear your thoughts on that.
It's an interesting take. It's interesting. You have me thinking, which is a good start, right? I mean,
thanks, Ryan.
It's a good start. I mean, I could have just been like, nope, that's dumb.
That's stupid. Yeah.
I mean, I think, they made a change of defensive coordinator, right? Jay Bateman's out now. So, I mean,
who's awful.
That should be a addition by subtraction in that situation. So I can buy into the defense being better, because I do think there was some talent.
Yeah, and they had a really good freshman, sophomore group of players.
Yeah,
like Grimes is going to be a junior now. Those D linemen that they recruited are going to be sophomores and juniors now.
Miles Murphy and Fox is back, and I can get there. I just think the offense is going to kind of sputter a little bit, like at times. I mean, Josh Downs is a great football player. He absolutely is. I know they have a couple quarterbacks that they're excited about, like you said, but I mean, I know the offensive line wasn't bad last year, but I thought they lost their best offensive lineman in Joshua Azuda to this offseason. So I just don't know if the talent level is going to be great at the skill position. So I don't think their offense is going to be great, but I can buy into the defense being a little better. But
which again, I said, best team that they will from North Carolina that they will face, and that's my, because they're going to have pass catchers, right? I mean, like you said, Josh Downs comes back. Emory Simmons, I believe, comes back. They've got tight ends that have come back and have played. They got some young receivers that are stepping up. I thought they landed some guys. They have a freshman running back coming in, George Petway, that I think is going to be a really good number 2 back for them this year. And Ty Chandler, to me, was a system runner. I mean, to me, he wasn't really a great player. He got his from the system, right? And I really think that you're going to see Phil Longo go back to kind of being a more balanced offense. And I think they're going to have some good backs. In my opinion, they're going to have some talent in the backfield. And I think Jacoby Criswell is a more natural runner than Sam Howell, which is going to add to that as well. So I think that's going to add a little dimension that we haven't seen. But it's really, to me, it's about I think the defense is going to be so much, and it's still not going to be great. Like, look, this is going to be like an 8-4, 9-3 at best North Carolina team, right? But they were 8-4 2 years ago, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not like North Carolina was an 11-2 team 2 years ago. They were 8-4 2 years ago and lost to every good team they played. They lost to freaking Florida State, for Pete's sake, 2 years ago, right? Florida State sucked.
At least they ran all over Miami, though.
That's right.
That's all that matters.
Oh, my God. That was one of the – I mean, I don't know how Manny Diaz survived that game.
I don't know. Man, Amani Carter almost retired at halftime trying to tackle Javonte Williams in space. Oh, my Lord.
What was the numbers? That was one of the most absurd –
I think they both had over 200 yards rushing.
They ran
it was like
554 yards, 10.1 per carry, and 6 touchdowns in that game.
Man.
That's absurd. And you are correct. They had 2 running backs over 100 yards that game. Michael Carter and Javon Williams both went over 100. I believe went over 200. Actually, Michael Carter ran for 308 on 24 carries. And Javonte Williams went for 236 on 23 carries.
See, it was Javonte Williams setting up Michael Carter, though, man. He was grinding him down, and then all of a sudden Michael Carter just hit the crease and he's out. See ya.
That was an absurd. I thoroughly enjoyed that game. But I think they're going to look more like that team, because I think they're going to have a quarterback that's – because, like, they didn't run Sam Howell at all that year. I mean, Sam this year was more – I mean, they had some design runs for him, but, like, when he hurt Notre Dame, it was off of stuff like Ian Book, was as a player, a scrambler, more so that. So I just think this is going to be the best North Carolina team Notre Dame has played. Now, is this a game Notre Dame should still win? Yeah. There's still a significant talent gap between Notre Dame and North Carolina. But I think North Carolina is going to be a sneaky good team this year. After that, I think there's a big drop-off. Big drop-off. I think Cal's just – what surprise – they're a sneaky quality team from a coaching standpoint. Justin Wilcox has done a really nice job coaching there. He doesn't have any players. Marshall actually, you know what's funny? Marshall has some of the best production coming back on the schedule next year. They got a quarterback that threw for a bunch of yards last year as a redshirt freshman.
And their running back's a good player.
Was he a
Ali.
freshman last year?
Yeah, it was a true freshman. Yeah.
Like he went for over 14 last year, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Huff is their head coach. Notre Dame fans should remember him. He actually interviewed. He was the guy that Notre Dame wanted to hire at running backs coach when they hired Lance Taylor, but he ended up staying at Bama and then ultimately got the Marshall job. He was at Penn State for a while. So he's done a nice job so far with them. But again, it's Marshall. It's Marshall's. UNLV stinks. Syracuse is not very good. Although I do like Schaefer at quarterback. I think he's going to have a nice year this year. I think he did some nice things in the run game last year. The pass game was a hot mess.
Yes, it was.
Year. I think it's going to be a little bit better this year. He's that kind of kid that, like, again, they're not good. I'm just for Syracuse. I think he's going to be a nice player for them this year.
Well, I mean, off the read option, because like you said, Schrader can run a little bit, and that running back Sean Tucker is a dude, man. He can run the football, and he's he was a track kid too. So that dude's got some legit. I think he broke a long run against Notre Dame a couple years ago, if I remember correctly, when he was a freshman.
Who was that?
The running back, Sean Tucker.
Yes, it was like late in the game. It was like it was like blowout time. But yeah, he made Tariq Bracy fall on his face and then ran past him for like an 80-yard. He ended up having well over 100 yards that game. He had a couple nice runs when the game was in doubt, but Notre Dame just ate Syracuse up at the line of scrimmage. He had nowhere to go.
Yeah,
and he had a really nice year last year. Really nice year. They're gonna face some good running backs this year. Notre Dame is. There's some teams that can run the football. I mean, Travis Dye at USC is a good running back. Obviously, Will Shipley in the backfield they have at Clemson. Ohio
Pace
State,
too, from Clemson too.
Travion Henderson, obviously. The kid from Marshall's a really good back. Sean Tucker. I think North Carolina is going to have some good backs. Garwo at BC is a tough kid.
He's a good runner, man. He ran for like 800 yards. Actually, he ran for 1,000 yards last year.
He went just over 1,000 last year, I believe, because they were talking. They said the reason I know that is they said he's a 1,000-yard rusher during the BC spring game. I was like, he didn't rush for 1,000 yards last year. And we looked at it and was like, yep, he ran for 1,045 last year.
I saw him the other day too, man. He's a little bowling ball. He's not a bad little player.
He's a big dude. Yeah. He's a big guy. He's not small. So they're going to face some good. They're going to be tested in the run game a lot more than they were this year, in my opinion. And that's why it's important for them to be better, because there are some teams that I don't know. I mean, Stanford's. I mean, we were talking about this last night. It is so bizarre what has happened to Stanford. 2017, they had a running back rush for 2,000 yards. 2017, that was just 4 years ago. Last year, they ran for 86.8 yards per game
as a team.
What they had 2,000-yard rushers in 3 seasons. McCaffrey did it in 15, Bryce Love did it in 17, and now they've become like the worst Power 5 rushing team, and it's not close.
It was so bad too, because me and Brian were talking about it. It's like they had Austin Jones and Nathaniel Pete, who are both decent little players too, right. And for whatever reason, their run game is just a mess right now. And their quarterback wasn't bad either, McKee. So it's not like you're just packing the box. You know what I mean? Like it's weird. It's very strange.
Very, very strange. Very, very strange situation. So interesting question about the schedule. It's weird. I think there's a nice. There's a good 6 teams on there, right? Clemson, Ohio State, BYU, North Carolina, BC, and who am I forgetting? Oh, and potentially USC, right? But after that 6, because at least USC is going to have some talent, right? They're not going to stink like they did last year. I just don't know if I buy the whole win the Pac-12, top 10 stuff that people are saying. But to me, there's a big drop-off between the first 6 and the bottom 6. Like the bottom 6 is pretty bad, in my opinion. I say maybe like a couple teams that might be okay in the middle. Marshall actually might be a decent team, but like for that level, they might be decent. Meaning Notre Dame should smack them, but they may still, go to a bowl game and do all that is what I mean. But after that, man, there's some bad teams. Navy stinks.
Yep.
UNLV stinks. Syracuse just doesn't. I mean, I like Coach Babers. He just hasn't been able to recruit there. I mean, they just don't have players, and the transfer portal has killed them.
Yeah, it has.
I'm actually shocked Tucker's still there, to be honest with you, because he had the receiver leave, and
Taj Harris,
it's been a problem.
I mean, I guess it's partly, you're in New York, and New York is a historically not very good state for football, right? So it's a tough attraction, I guess. But yeah, it's not been great. Because I thought Babers was doing a really nice job his first couple years, and then all of a sudden it's just nope, nothing.
And the thing that's been weird is their offenses have been so bad. I mean, that's what he was known. I mean, he was an offensive wizard. I mean, he did some
Bowling
great
Green,
things.
right?
Even before that, he took Eastern Illinois to the wasn't he Jimmy Garoppolo's coach? Or am I thinking somebody else?
He may have been. I'm not sure.
They went to the national semifinals at Eastern Illinois. Did a really nice job of Bowling Green. He had Syracuse. I mean, they beat Clemson once and almost beat him again. Won 10 games in 2018, and then just came crashing down. And they just haven't been able to be good on offense. And so it's been weird. It's been really weird. 99 problems of BK81. I'm always going to read that full thing. I'm just sorry. It's going to happen. Imagine if Notre Dame could get Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, Manti, and Jalen Smith on the field at the same time. They seem to be getting there with 2022 and 2023 linebacker classes. Pump the brakes.
Right.
I love the linebackers that they've signed the last couple of years. Not one of them graded out as high as Manti or Jalen Smith. Not one of them. Manti was a top 5 national player. And Jalen Smith is one of the best athletes I've ever seen at that position. So I love the excitement. I think this Notre Dame has a chance to have one of, if not the best group of linebackers in the country, if the development is there, because they're recruiting at a very high level. But you just named 3 of the greatest linebackers in college football the last 10 to 15 years.
Ever.
Right? In one linebacking court. That's just, I don't see that. Jalen Sneed is a guy I like a lot. He's not Jalen Smith. And I love Junior Tuihalamaka, and I think he's got a chance to be a good player. And I love Drake Bowen and Nolan Ziegler, and I liked Josh Burnham at linebacker. If they get Jaden Osborne, I love him. Guys, those are a couple generational players in there with Manti and Jalen. And I don't know if I would call Jeremiah a generational player, but you could at least have a conversation about it. I mean,
he was special. He was special.
The only reason I say him because it did take him a while. Like where Manti and Jalen were impactful the minute they stepped foot on campus, right? It took Jeremiah 3 years to really get going. But once he got on there, he was really, really good. But I mean, I would just be happy if these guys panned out and been to be one of those guys. I would be very happy. I mean,
I took it when I first read it as you're saying like stylistically, and I could get there a little bit because that makes sense because there's a lot of different body types, there's a lot of different play styles.
Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah is very similar body type to Jalen Sneed.
Sure.
Right. Manti, very similar to Junior Tuihalamaka. Jalen Smith and Drake Bowen. I mean, they're 6'2", 215, plays running back in high school, really athletic. Similar body types, similar styles, yes. Mm-hmm. Same talent level, no.
Right.
No, that's just unfair. But if I'll say this, I hope this is in 2 years. 99 Problems BK1 is coming back being like, I told y'all. I would love that. This one was I'd love to be happy, but I'm excited about the linebackers, but no, it's not. It's not that. Jim Halloran says, does Riley Mills have the speed? I'll let you answer this one, Ryan, because I mean, I've talked about this one before. It's a good question. Does Riley Mills have the speed to play the 5 technique?
Yeah, no, he does. He does. I think the best things that I like about Riley is I think Riley has good flexibility, which I think is why he can play on the edge, and I think he has good closing burst. I think that he has both those things. This is a little different than just being a true 9 tech that's playing in a little more of increased space, right? Like you're going to be playing through a little bit of contact. You're going to be playing through multiple you're going to be playing through tight end tackle, like a little bit of double teams at points. So it's not as clean as just saying like this guy's a pure outside track rusher that's navigating space a ton comparative to what a Viper or weak side defensive end would be. So yeah, I think, Jim, I think that he has plenty enough of athleticism to play that spot. He's got a good mix of versatility, but the best things about him, I think, from that position are that he's got flexibility. He's got closing burst for his size.
Well, I think we've seen it too. I mean, the best game he's ever had in his career was as a defensive end against Virginia last year. So with what they ask him to do, now if you're going to go and have him be like an old school Florida State DN where he's going to be pin himself in at a 45-degree angle and attack that way, that's not what he does. But with what they ask the big end to do, I think Riley's got definitely athletic enough to play that position. And Kenneth James, kids with eligibility need to be aware that the list put out by Mel Kiper Jr. in November aren't necessarily what NFL scouts think. I believe Kevin Austin got misled by this. Go ahead, Ryan.
I started this one because I actually, Kenneth, if you want to like just give me a little more context to exactly what you're saying. So you're saying the preseason list is how I'm reading this, right, Brian? Is that what you're getting out of this too?
Well, pre-draft. I mean, because he said November. November.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Well, I mean, so there is an advisory board for the NFL draft. You're allowed to submit your paperwork so that you get the advisory basically sends you back a grade. It's first, second, third, or back to school grade, right? Mm-hmm. So Kevin Austin submitted his grade, and what happens is that you have scouts that are on the advisory board. Usually they're Blesto scouts, which are the people that go through and do junior days, and they kind of scout for the year in advance type of situation. So they watched Kevin Austin when he submitted to the advisory board, as long as he did that, and they sent him back a grade. So whatever they thought he was as a football player, and like, let's not be like Kevin Austin, even though he had a great combine, I still have seen him mostly in like fourth round in the mock drafts, right? Which is kind of where I've been saying, like third to fourth round, I feel like is kind of the bucket for Kevin Austin. So I'm sure that he sent the feedback, and I'm sure they sent him back and I think they did give him a back to school grade.
He did. And he read it. But the thing we have to understand about Kevin is, I think Kevin's 2 previous years, you lost a whole year because of an injury. You lost another year because of suspension. He realized, like, look, maybe I come back and I can go higher, but like, I'm ready. I don't think Kevin necessarily wanted to continue to be in school. I think Kevin knew. I don't think Kevin was misled, Kenneth. I think Kevin made an educated decision. Mm-hmm. That led him to the NFL. I disagree with it in regards to what I think is best for him from a football standpoint, but it's not always about that. I mean, I think he was just ready to move on. I think Kevin is misguided on who he is, but I don't think that's Mel Kiper's fault. And to a degree, I kind of like that Kevin is misguided because it means he's confident. I just hope he's not so misguided that he's unwilling to recognize where his game needs work and improve his game. That's the biggest difference. If he's super confident in himself, but also is willing to take coaching, I think Kevin will be a nice pro. If he's kind of doesn't take coaching, and he never took coaching super well at Notre Dame, partly because he was never really given real coaching. Then he won't. But I'm hoping that he does because I like Kevin. Kevin's a good kid. Yeah, I got no issues with Kevin.
And I kind of skated over the Mel Kiper Jr. part. So Kenneth, when those kids make the decision, I always say this on Twitter a ton. You need to separate the media perspective versus what the advisory board tells you. Like the advisory board is the NFL, right? Like they're going to tell you what they think you are.
And your agent. And
exactly.
Right.
And you're going to have advisors around you, just personal advisors. So that's not where the decision-making process comes from. If kids are making decisions based upon what media is telling them, then they're not well advised just in general. So
right. Now, can a something like that from a Mel Kiper maybe have a kid feeling a little better about himself than he should? Yeah, but there's so much that happens from that moment to a kid making a decision that he would literally have to just ignore everything else he heard because of what Mel Kiper said. And again, Mel gets a lot of crap. I enjoy Mel Kiper. I enjoy him because I look at it as entertainment.
He's a godfather, man.
And he has revolutionized an industry. It's like he's done for the NFL draft what Tom Lemming did for recruiting. I have a ton of respect for him. And the thing about Mel is I always feel like whatever he says, right or wrong, I feel like I'm getting an honest opinion from him. I just don't think I just have never like put a lot of stock in his evaluations, but I have a lot of respect for Mel. I do. I like Mel Kiper Jr. He's a lot of fun, and he'll stand by what he says. I mean, that's the other thing about him, and he never backs down. I like people that aren't afraid to be wrong, because what happens is you get people that just give these like evaluations where like you've covered every potential outcome in your analysis in an attempt to not have to be pinned down on something. That's one of the things I like about Ryan. He'll take a very strong stance. One of the reasons I had him write for us, he'll take a very strong stance, right or wrong. You know what he thinks and what he's going to feel. And I like that about him because it's like that scene from Tombstone. He reminds me of me. Except I followed up with, yes, I hate him. I don't say that one.
I don't think I've ever been wrong though. So that's
where we are not in this stage, because I know I've been wrong. And all you gotta say, if I've said I've never been wrong, all somebody in the chat's got to say Josh Barajas, and then I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. Market Weiss, I think is what we're gonna say there, or Mark at Weiss. Love aggressive, love fast, don't love over pursuing. I'm okay with taking chances, but for the most part, I mainly like the focus of keeping everything in front of you on D. I think you're making some things, putting some things together here, Mark, that I don't think go together. I don't think fast aggressive equals over pursuing. With all due respect, we saw over pursuit problems in Clark Lee's defense at times, which was the ultimate keep everything in front of you defense at Notre Dame. Mike Elko and Marcus Freeman were far more aggressive than Clark Lee. They were all very successful. They just did it different ways. I think they were all excellent defensive coordinators. He was very much a keep things in front of you kind of guy. And we still saw over pursuit from them. And so I don't think that these things necessarily go hand in hand, in my view.
Oh, you want my context? I'm sorry. My apologies. You just said it so perfectly.
Hello.
You said it so well.
I left Ryan speechless. We should just end the show right now. I left Ryan Roberts speechless.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. Proud of myself.
Well, no. I agree with everything you said. I think from a coaching philosophy perspective, right, being aggressive does not mean that you're going to over pursue. You're still maintaining the proper angle. In theory, you're just doing it in a different way than where a Clark Lee that you just said, or I think of how the LA Rams did it under Brandon Staley, where they were playing a lot of off coverage, and they're just like, if you're going to score, you're going to do it in a lot of plays, and that gives you more of an opportunity to make a bad decision, right? Like, we're going to make you draw out, which is a very much different conversation and ideology than I think Marcus Freeman and this staff has, right? So it's going to look a lot different than that. But to Market Weiss's points, right, I don't think that we can associate, and to your point also, Brian, I don't think we can associate being aggressive with playing over aggressive, right? Like, there's a huge difference there. No coach is going to sacrifice integrity. Well, in theory, are going to sacrifice integrity for being aggressive. So I agreed with you. That's why you left me speechless, all right? I agreed with you. Are you doing the same thing to me now? Is that happening? Brian, are you frozen or are you messing with me? All right, either Brian's frozen or I'm frozen. So I'm going to continue here, I think. Yep, Brian is frozen. So sorry about that awkward silence there. I thought Brian was doing the same thing to me and pretending like he was. All right, so let's move on here. Let's move on. Appreciate everybody for that little laugh. That was hysterical. So Michael Campbell said, Tobias Merriweather is saying he's taking a spot. His confidence is off the roof because he puts in the work. He believes he's going to run past a lot of people during his track speed and experience. Michael, I am very excited to see Tobias get to campus. So I think he brings a style that is a little different to the table as far as what they have on offense, because he's a guy that I think is similar from a Lorenzo style standpoint, where I think he can play a little bit of the W. I think he can play out into the field in the X. I think he can do a lot of different things in that system. So I really like the ability for potentially getting multiple receivers on the field, that I think that alignment isn't that big of a deal, right? Like, I don't think that you have to pencil guys into one spot. I don't think you have to just say, this is the only lineup that we can run from a wide receiver perspective. So I think Tobias is going to have an opportunity to play. He's a very talented football player. There's no doubt about it. The trouble that he has, I wouldn't say trouble, but he's not an early enrollee, right? So we're not going to see him on campus until the summer. So he's going to have a little bit of a shorter time to develop a role and grab a role in the offense. But I think the talent level is certainly there. So I'm excited about Tobias Merriweather. I look forward to him getting to campus. I think we had the next question was, from 99 Problems, but BK81. NFL draft question for you, Ryan. From a talent perspective, am I crazy for thinking Foskey is comparable to Will Anderson? Of course, that's from Alabama, the defensive end. I think Will's stats are partly because he is elite, but also partly because he is partly a byproduct of Alabama. That's not a criticism, but that seems to be something that shapes Alabama's players' projection to the NFL. All right, So I think I get where you're coming from, 99 Problems. I will say this. It's very early on in the scouting process of Will Anderson, but I will say he's good, man. He's really, really good. He's a dynamic football player. If I had to put a number on who is the early favorite to maybe being the first non-quarterback in next year's class, it's Will. I mean, because he's a really talented, flexible speed rusher who's got strong hands. And I don't think that, like, byproduct of a system, I don't think you have 31 tackles for loss and 16 sacks in a season because you're a byproduct of a system, right? Like, he shattered records this past year. So I think Will is a really fantastic football player from a starting point. I also think that Isaiah Foskey, if I had to point to a couple of guys that I think are the next edge after Will early on in this process, I would say Isaiah Foskey's up there. I would say Miles Murphy, who Notre Dame is going to see at Clemson, are two very similar players. They're incredibly long. They kind of hit some inside counters. They're more speed to power type of players, and I think true outside track rushers. So I think that's where the comparison really comes for me. But I think that Isaiah has a great chance to go top 15, top 20 next year. Like, I think he has that type of talent level, and I was happy to see him go back to school because I think that his arc could be very similar to like an Aiden Hutchinson, where I think if Foskey came out this year, he's a solid second-round pick, maybe sneaks into the latter half of the first round. But if he comes back and he has a season that we think that he can have, I wouldn't doubt it if Isaiah Foskey's a future top 10 to 15 pick. Like, I think that's possible for him.
I don't know what happened. So,
Brian, it was really funny. I just want to put this out there before you go. Ready? So you just said you left me speechless, right? Well, I thought I left you speechless. You were just like
knocked me out of the park. I mean, you just knocked me out of the show. I couldn't even be in the show anymore. That's
you were like
good
that.
Whatever you said was.
I waited for a good 5 seconds. I'm like, are you messing with me? Because I thought
no. So what happened? We lost power. Like, our power went out. So I don't know what I was freezing on. I don't know what happened, but we lost power. So, and I'm so thankful I bought this new computer a month or so ago because the other computer took like 15 minutes to get back on. So I don't know what happened. We were like, and it's like a nice, beautiful, sunny day. I have no clue what happened.
You need to go into these comments when it happened because people are like LMAOing and LOLing. And
I hate when Sub-Zero attacks Brian mid-analysis. I don't know what happened. Some of these, so I don't know what happened, but we lost power. So that's when I got kicked out. But I did want to address the and I don't know what was said about Tobias Merriweather, but I did want to respond to one of the comments there. Go back to 2009 when Bama won their first title. Here's the top tackle for loss guy that they had: 14, 14 and a half, 18, 11, 9, 12 and a half, 14 and a half, 19, 13, 19 and a half, 12 and a half, 13. Will Allen, 33 and a half. When you destroy anything else anyone has ever done in the system, you're not a system guy. You're a great player. So I don't think he's a byproduct system. And I also think the system doesn't cause you to be twitchy. The system doesn't cause you to have great hands. The system doesn't cause you to do all those kind of things. I think those things are just inherent. So yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I think he's a special talent. And I'm going to tell you something right now. That Alabama edge combination next year is going to be not fun to defend because you're going to have him on one side and then Dallas Turner is going to be playing a whole lot more on the edge next year in passing situations too.
He's pretty good.
Yes. That's a couple twitchy dudes when it comes to rushing the quarterback. But I agree. I think Isaiah Foskey has a chance to be the second best edge player in the country next year. And they're completely different players. That's the thing I like. Like, Isaiah's a big, physical, like, potentially all-around player. It's going to be impressive. I'm looking forward to you and I getting together after the draft and kind of going over the early, 2023 draft prospects for Notre Dame and their opponents.
Mm-hmm.
Because next year's draft class on the defensive line, if you think this year's D-line draft class is good, wait till next year's when it's Anderson, Foskey, the two kids from Clemson. I mean, it's going to be an absurd top 10 next year.
I think the biggest difference between this year and next year is defensive end maybe even a little deeper this year than next year, but like next year's a very good class early on, it appears. But I think the biggest difference is the defensive tackle class is going to be so much better than this year. Jalen Carter from Georgia is better than both the Georgia kids coming out this year.
And here's the thing I'll say about the edge. I think the edge so far is deeper. I think there's way more elite players next year. Like you might get a defensive end drafted in this draft that has no business going number one. None. Next year, it's almost like, wait a minute, you didn't draft Will Anderson? Like, are you nuts? Yeah, I think I don't know what the depth is going to be like, but just off the top of my head, I can rattle off potentially 4 top 10 draft picks on the D-line next year. Just off the top of my head. And Anderson, Foskey, Breezy, and Murphy. I mean, just right.
Carter too, man.
Yes,
Carter's
that's another one. I mean,
he's a dude.
Like there's going to be some guys coming out next year on the defensive line.
I'm telling you,
if Zach Harrison can kind of put it all together, he's an athletic guy. I don't know what kind of football player he is, but there's going to be some really good defensive linemen coming out next year. There's no doubt about it. And to your point, the interior one, that's what I've heard that from a lot of NFL draft people that I talk to and read. And you've said this to me before as well. The interior is going to be so much better than it was this year. But yeah, there's going to be some dudes next year on the defensive line. And I know you guys were talking about Tobias Merriweather, and I was gone. Somebody said, I'm trying to find the comment about Corey Robinson, and that they hope that Tobias Merriweather, it says, let me see here. I'm trying to find it because Will Chesanik says Tobias Merriweather is going to be like Corey Robinson, hopefully. That's not a hopeful situation. If Tobias Merriweather ends up like Corey Robinson, that's to me a disappointment. That's not a knock on Corey Robinson. Corey Robinson was a nice, solid player. Tobias Merriweather is not a nice, solid prospect. Tobias Merriweather needs to be more like Chase Claypool, and Michael Floyd and Will Fuller type production. I mean, I genuinely think Tobias can be that good. I think he's a top 50 national product. I graded him out as I could be wrong, but Tobias Merriweather is not just a good player. I think he's an elite player, in my opinion. So I'm going to be honest with you. I would be disappointed if Tobias Merriweather is what Corey Robinson was at Notre Dame. Corey was a good, solid player, but he was not fast. He was not a dynamic, take a game over kind of guy. I remember he was getting like some first round NFL draft pick buzz. Remember that? And it was like just the weirdest thing. They wasn't first round draft pick, but it was like somebody saw them play and was like, I think Corey Robinson's going to be a high pick next year. So I'm like,
that's because he played early in his dad's David Robinson. That's all.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a strange thing. But yeah, somebody said this, and this is an interesting one. Irish Natty within 3 years. Tobias Merriweather is more like Justin Ross and Corey Robinson. And see, I don't think that's a good comparison either. I think he's more like T. Higgins, but more dynamic is what I think. I think that's the body type, the skill set, the style of play. I think he's much more like T. Higgins than he is. I'll say my version of T. Higgins.
Yeah.
than he is of Justin Ross, just stylistically and athletically.
Yeah, and I mean, when Justin Ross was healthy, man, dude was a different cat. Even stylistically, if we're comparing him, like that kid was that juice, length.
They're different players.
Nuts, yeah.
I mean, the kid had 1,000 yards receiving as a freshman and didn't even have 50 catches. I mean, I'm going to go look up the numbers. It was. I believe I'm correct on that. Yeah, he had 1,000 yards exactly, and 9 touchdowns on 46 catches. That's pretty good. Last I checked, that's pretty good. And T was 59 for 1167 the next year. I don't know if Tobias will have that kind of like 20 yards per catch. That was just the offensive system, and they played a pretty crap schedule, to be honest with you, because we saw T in the postseason struggle a little bit. He got locked down pretty good by Ohio State. I mean, they were jamming him up pretty good. He had some big games against just teams that aren't good, but I think that's more stylistically the comparison for me than the other one. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that one. So, Ryan, can we get back to this and wrap this stuff up here real quick? We Are Not Marshall says, Brian, do you see different blitz packages from Al this year? I would love to see an overload from one side and a safety blitz from the weak side. We saw stuff like that at times last year. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see different blitzes, but not because it's Al Golden as much as it's the personnel is going to be different.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I say it's your 2 guys, right? These are Ryan's boys. I'm going to give them to Ryan and let him run with those, like I gave Cam Hart.
Middle of the field, baby. Middle of the field.
There's Luafau and Brandon Joseph. Brandon Joseph. One thing I did like from him, and he didn't do it a ton at Northwestern, but I thought he showed really good instincts as a blitzer. I think we'll see him do those things. and I think we'll see Maris Luafau do that. So I think we'll see both of those guys use as blitzers this times. And I think Ramon Henderson in a few times when he was used as an edge blitzer, like there was a Virginia game where he came off the edge his first game and just blew up the running back. I think we'll see more. I think we'll see more pressures this year, but I think it's more about the personnel is better for that than necessarily a difference in philosophy for Marcus Freeman and Al Golden. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Watts blitzing from off the slot too could be some interesting, because I think I think the biggest differences, to your point, is the fact that like second and third levels I think are just a little more athletic as a whole now going into 2022. So that's why I think that there's definitely going to be different blitz packages. And I think the other thing that you said earlier was you had high hopes for Isaiah Foskey going into last year, but you didn't quite know exactly what he was going to be. Now everybody knows who number 7 is, right? So I think that you can use it to the advantage. You mentioned earlier, we're going to slide protection a ton for Isaiah Foskey. Well, what's that mean? That means that there's going to be less numbers to one side comparative to the other. So I think you're going to take advantage of those numbers, because football is a numbers game. It's what it boils down to. So I think you're going to take advantage of that. And I think that you have the second and third level defenders that are better at getting home than maybe they were last year.
And Will, his last name is actually pronounced Chasonic, so we will try to get that right moving forward, Will. But I appreciate your comments on that. With a Sean S. with a super chat says, was the Bracey who started at Georgia a false indication? Thought he was a Julian Love trajectory after that. Now he seems cemented as a second stringer. I would not call him a second stringer. We're going to see a lot of Tariq Bracey this year. Number one, he's part of a rotation at corner, and he's their starting nickel. And in today's era, a nickel is basically a starting position in a lot of instances. I don't think it was a false indication, Sean, and I get where you're coming from, and I think it's a fair thing to say. I think the difference between Tariq Bracey and Julian Love is twofold. Number one is Julian was a more natural defensive player, where Tariq was more of a natural athlete, but not – I think – Tariq is a better athlete than Julian. I mean, anyone that I've ever talked to at Notre Dame will tell you that Tariq Bracey is one of the best athletes on the team. I just don't think Tariq is a natural football player. He's also a lot smaller than Julian was, like size-wise. But I think the other difference is Julian could get beat for a 50-yard gain, and it would just piss him off. He was a supremely confident player beyond his talent level, in my opinion. I think part of the reason Julian was so good is Julian believed he was better than he actually was. And I say that as a compliment, Ryan. Tariq doesn't have that. Tariq doesn't have that supreme confidence in himself, which is why he had the collapse he had in 2020. But I think Tariq Bracey was a very underrated player for Notre Dame last year. I thought Tariq had a really good year for Notre Dame last season. Not great, but a good year. He played a lot more outside than people realize last season.
Yeah. Well, and I think he could be a weapon in the slot, because I think he has a lot of man coverage skills. Like, he's a sticky dude. I feel like he's always in the right spot carrying vertically. It's just the fact that, just doesn't have length, man, to disrupt the catch points. So if we're put him in the slot where it's a little more of you're working majority, unless they're bigger slots, against smaller type wide receivers, you're able to kind of keep your eyes toward the line of scrimmage, a little more traditional sense if you're running a lot of zone from the slot as well. I think that's going to play to him, because, I mean, as a click and close type of corner, I think he's got a lot of ability, and he's a really good athlete. I think he could run with just about anybody. The issues are, like you said, especially outside, there's just some limitations with length. Like there is.
And his instincts aren't good enough to overcome that.
Right.
If he had Sean Crawford's instincts, he'd be a heck of a player. Because that's the thing. Sean Crawford had exceptional instincts as a football player. He just the injuries, and then he was even shorter than Tariq is. He had physical limitations.
I think Tariq's got a little bit of what I kind of thought with Troy Pride to a sense sometimes. I feel like he didn't really play the football that well in the air, and I think that's like a natural instinctual type of thing sometimes, right? Like he was always in the right spot. Yeah. He was always in the right spot. It's just sometimes he just wouldn't get his eyes turned back to the football, and he wouldn't be able to play the football. He just wasn't natural at it.
Yep. Jay Montalbano, hi Brian and Ryan. If you're the head coach, do you want to coach the 21 or the 22 team? Who's better?
Am I just assuming that the coaching staffs are the same around me?
If you're the head coach, so you get to pick the coaching staff. So it's more looking at the rosters and which one would you rather coach?
That's actually.
I'll say this: I think 22 has the better team. I think 21 has the schedule I like more.
Yeah.
I think this coaching staff would have run the table last year. Easily. Like they would have beat Cincinnati. They'd have beat Cincinnati the way Cincinnati beat them. Because again, the schedule was soft. I mean, they'd have gone 12-0 with a 1 win over a ranked team. 1. This year's schedule is going to be a lot harder. I mean, it's kind of like 2007. 2017 was arguably the second or third best team Brian Kelly had. They had 3 losses. Because they played 8 ranked teams that year. Right? The next year they go 11-2. They were 1-2, and they had a winning. No, they played 7 ranked teams that year, and they went 4-3 against them. So over half their schedule was teams that finished the year ranked. 10 win. They had Georgia, the national runners up. You lost to by 1. You lost to a top 15 Miami team, a top 25 Stanford team. You beat a top 15 Michigan State team that won 10 games. You beat a top 15 USC team by 35. You beat Michigan State on the road, who finished in the top 15 with 10 wins, by 20, and they scored last. You pounded a top 25 NC State team by 21, and I'm trying to remember who the 4th ranked team. So you had LSU in the bowl game was the 4th ranked team that they beat. So half of your regular season opponents were ranked. The next year they had a better record. They went 11-2. They went 1-2 against ranked opponents. They played 3 ranked teams all year, lost to 2 of them. So the schedule can dictate a lot more of what your record is necessarily than your talent level. And that's just the reality. Or not 2 years later, because it was in 2019. They went 3-1 against ranked teams in 2018. So to me, Ryan, I think that the 21 schedule would make that team really attractive. Because with good coaching, last year's team would have been much better, in my opinion. But it just the roster, I think this year's team is going to be better.
Yeah, I think so.
Wise.
I think so too, but that's kind of what changed my because I started thinking about last year's team that had a lot of talent still, but I have my coaches around me. So in theory, I'm thinking like I have Harry Heastan on last year's team instead. You know what I mean? And the easier schedule, like you said. So I might defer to last year's, honestly, just when you kind of take everything into account. But it's also, I feel like if you're picking this year's team, it's also like kind of like the mystery box thing, you know, because like you think you know. But then you'll kind of figure out some things here pretty quick. So I think I would take last year's just because it's a little more of a known quantity, and I have different people around it.
It's known on both sides. We know more about what Notre Dame's team was. We know more about what the schedule was. And so I think this team has more talent. The reason I say that is you have the freshman class, which was really good, is now a year older. Foskey has a year under his belt. Adamiola has got a full year starting under his belt. Justin Adamiola had a much more improved role. Marist is going to be healthy this year. Cam Hart's got a year under his belt. And the incoming freshman class is going to help. But again, it's just the schedule is the tougher thing. So I think that's what. But I think they're both very talented teams, and that's what I love about the question, because it's not an easy answer. I like questions that aren't easy answers, and that was definitely one. Rob Didoff, Brian and Ryan, off topic. Looks like the weather is going to be good for the spring game. I hope to make it to the IB tailgate. We hope to see you there as well, Rob.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a lot of fun. John A1, is Henderson interchangeable at safety and nickel?
To a degree. I don't love him at nickel, to be honest. I think
love him at corner. That's the thing, is a lot of stuff at corner is going to be what nickel is what he did at corner, right, Ryan? And he wasn't a natural flip his hips guy. That's the thing with Ramon. He's not. He was never a great turn and run guy. No. And at safety, he can be more downhill. So
and he's a little bit of a glider. He's got like those long strides to him. You know, I like Xavier Watts a little more as like an interchangeable big nickel safety type. Like that's the guy for me.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to this one. Will Chesonic. We have a chance to say his name correctly. Ryan. So I guess he doesn't want to hear what I have to say. Do you believe Deion Cole? It's not going to stop me from saying it, but he doesn't want to hear it. Ryan, do you believe Deion Colsey has the highest pro potential of any receiver on the roster? I feel Low Styles has more potential to be an elite college football receiver, but Colsey has all the pro tools, in my opinion. Thoughts?
I think we got this same question on a
similar question.
Yeah. Well, and it's going to remain the same. I think that Lorenzo Styles has a higher upside from the ability that he has to play multiple spots. And I think that he's where the NFL is going, right? Like, I don't think a receiver, you're just going to play in one single spot anymore. Like, a guy's going to move all the way around. I think he's just an instant separator. I think he's going to kind of be a 3-level threat if he hits the peak of what he can be. I really do think that Deion Colsey has an outstanding profile as far as the length and speed, But I really do think that Lorenzo Styles, he just kind of wins me over when you just talk about the ability that he has to win in so many different areas. I think he's just a little more of a diverse, versatile wide receiver than Dion, if that makes sense.
I still feel like Dion has the highest ceiling on the current roster. I do. But that's for college. I think the NFL game has changed a lot the last 5-6 years, where you're seeing more guys like Lorenzo Styles, route runners, or Devontae Adamses, Cooper Kuppses. There's still a need for, there's still, people still love the Mike Evans type players, right? There's still a need for there. And that's more of where Dion is. But you're seeing now the guys that are just dominating in the NFL now are the guys that are more like Lorenzo Styles. Smaller, 6'1", 6'2", elite route runners, elite, can do all those type of things. So I think that pro potential, there's a lot more positions that you can slide a Lorenzo Styles into than offenses that are looking for the next Deion Colsey type of player. So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. I'll say this, the guy that has the highest ceiling, however, the guy with the NFL potential is currently not on the roster. My answer will change once the roster gets updated this summer, and it'll be Tobias Merriweather. And then our next question is about Tobias Merriweather. Camden Hirschberger asked, did you have Tobias ranked ahead of CJ Williams? Yes. And I was someone who did not change my opinion of CJ when he went to USC. And I know some people do that. Well, he really wasn't that. CJ Williams is a really good football player. And I like CJ. And I pushed for him to move up in the rankings at SI and the SI 99 when we put our rankings together. And he moved up from the 80s, just a little bit. But I always had Tobias ranked higher because we had Tobias in the top 50 at SI 99. We had him at 46. And I would have had him a couple spots higher because there was a couple guys and I'm like, that guy ain't better than Tobias Merriweather. Not at receiver. We had him pretty high at receiver, but in some other positions. But yes, I always had Tobias. Tobias was my number one ranked receiver on the Notre Dame board from basically the beginning of the whole process. Ryan, who did you have higher, Tobias? I think I know the answer, but Tobias or CJ?
Yeah, I didn't watch CJ as much as Tobias, but I just kind of envision CJ as a really good possession receiver. I think he could play like some big slot stuff too, and I think he's really dependable. But I just think that Tobias just has more upside as far as like being a game breaker, right? Like I think he can create more explosive plays. I think he's more alignment versatile. So I would always align with the guys that I think can kind of just do more. You know what I mean?
And CJ to me was a volume pass catcher. He was a lot like Juju Smith-Schuster in college, volume pass catcher. But I never viewed Juju as a take a game over and kind of guy like I thought a T. Higgins could be, a Justin Ross could be. Like to me, Tobias has more that type of impact where he doesn't need to catch 9 balls for 120 yards. He'll catch 5 for 120 yards. And that guy scares you more. I mean, if we're just being honest, Will Fuller scares you more than Michael Floyd. That's just as a defensive coordinator, he just does. Michael will catch 30 more passes than Will. Will will have more yards. And that's exactly what happened. Will Fuller had about 200 more yards than Michael Floyd in his last year. He was like 1260 something. I'm actually going to look that up because I want to, me, I like to be accurate. But Will Fuller had like 65 catches for over 1,200 yards in 2015. Yeah, 62 catches for 1,258 yards. Michael Floyd in his last year had 100 catches, but only had 1,147 yards. Now, part of that was the system and, different quarterbacks and all that, but you get the point, right? Like he did more with less. And that's a big difference to me between Tobias and CJ is if I'm a defensive coordinator, I'm a whole lot more afraid of Will Fuller than I am of Michael Floyd. And they're both great players, but that's just the way that they were used, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the last one from Paul Keene. Do you think this team is better than the 2017, 2018, and 2015 teams?
I have no idea.
You want to take a crack at that? So let's say if you were to take what you think this team will be, right? Because the answer right now is we don't have a clue what this team is going to be yet.
Right.
But let's say this team is what we think it's going to be. Guys pan out, all that kind of stuff.
No. Probably not. I'm always optimistic. So I think that the team this year has a high ceiling. Like I do think that they're contenders, but I mean, like that 2015 team, specifically like on the offensive line, like there's just known commodities that I feel like you just kind of look at. And you're just like, I'm more comfortable with that right now than the projection. So I think I would say no to the question, but I'm willing to entertain it because I do think that the upside is there. But like right now, I would say no.
I think this team has a chance to be better than all of them. And here's why I say that. The talent won't be better. The 2015 team is still a better talented team, but it's a better team. Because that 2015 team pissed away a lot of talent. We've talked about this. Now, I'll say this. Who would be better if you could take the same coaching staff, same strength program, and put them on all those teams? I think this team would probably rank second or third.
It's fair.
Because that 2017 team was loaded with – because if you had better coaching in 2017, Brandon Wimbush would have spent the whole season throwing to Chase Claypool, Equinemius St. Brown, Kevin Stefferson, and Miles Boykin, as opposed to Cam Smith and Chris Fink, and you know what I mean? Like, that's just the reality. And that would have made that team so much better. The 2015 team still to me, if all things are equal from a coaching standpoint, the 2015 team is still the best team, Notre Dame team, the best team they would have had. It's the most talented team they would have had.
Team was loaded, man. Loaded.
23 may have a chance to get there, but that team was loaded. But again, it's the better team. I don't think that 2015 team was a great team. They lost to every good team they played, every single one, and almost lost to a couple other good teams like Temple, right? So to me, that was the most talented team, but their coaching on defense sucked, and the strength program was a hot mess. So best team, this team has a chance to be that. I still think right now the best Notre Dame team of that group was 2018. Best team, not most talented, but the best team. That 2018 was a better team. 2015 was by far the most talented team. I'm sorry, I'll say it again. The 2015 team should have won a national championship. There's no question about it. If you'd have given Nick Saban and his staff that team, they would have won a championship that year and beat Clemson even more convincingly than they did. I think Notre Dame had the best roster in college football that year. There's no one that can convince me otherwise. No one. Alabama had freaking Jacob Coker at quarterback. Come on. So, yes, I think that team – I mean, and that team still almost beat Clemson at Clemson, right? You know, so, yes, I think that team in 2015 was the biggest waste of talent that I've ever seen at Notre Dame in my life, my entire life. Then that's saying a lot because we've seen some teams get wasted. So that is going to do it for me today for us, Ryan. I've enjoyed this. Was a fun show, and I appreciate you covering for me when I got frozen when our power went out. I really, really enjoy that. I really enjoy that you can take over for me and allow me to get back here. So everybody have a great rest of the day. Hey, listen, check the message board, sign up. We got a lot of good conversation going. 2000. This is perfect timing, Mace. 2,000 is not enough, right? Join the message board, crush that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for our newsletter, check out the Built Bar. Hey, merch store's been a little slow lately, y'all. Y'all need to pick it up. Okay, let's get some more stuff from the merch store. And here's the thing. If you haven't signed up for Irish Breakdown and you want to get stuff from the merch store, sign up first. Because if you sign up for $4.99 monthly membership, you will get 10% off your next entire purchase to the merch store. If you sign up for an annual membership, or if you decide you just want to support us and you're not a message board person, but you want to support us, sign up for one of our booster clubs. We got the Shamrock Club, which is $100. You'll still get access to the message board if you want it. The Blue Club is $150. The Gold Club is $200. And that just goes directly to us as opposed to a super chat, that kind of thing, which is really nice, which we really appreciate. And you still get the discount, right? So if you sign up, you get 20% off your next merch store purchase. So really appreciate everybody and all your support. 2,000 down, and we're not even close to being done. So we're going to keep putting out great content. And as I said before, Ryan, I told them before you got on there, I told you that I don't want you to be the only full-time employee for very long. So we got to keep growing to make that happen. I told you all from the very beginning, if you support us and you help us grow and we start making more money, I'm going to be investing that revenue back into the company. Ryan is a perfect example. A year ago at this time, I did not have the resources to grow and hire someone full-time. Your support allowed us to get to that point where we could grow, and I'm not done. You keep helping us grow, and I'm going to keep growing, and I'm going to keep building this sucker up. So, and I look forward to much, 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 much more. So anyway, have a great rest of your day, and thank you all so much for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.